The story begins with the fact that we see a guy sitting in an apartment and watching a photo that showed a guy. The guy who watched the photos and said that after 5 years in the obituary they wrote about his death. He recalled how 3 years ago their sick mother died, who was desperately searching for her missing brother. He was supported by relatives who came to all this, and his mother had been ill for a long time and now she was in a better world. The guy was standing in front of the flyers where there was a picture of his brother, and he took and crumpled one of them, and leaving the house, he threw it on the floor. He had already given up on finding his brother and decided to leave Korea for military service in Africa by plane. While he was flying, he thought that it was unlikely that he would be able to return to Korea later. The guy was sitting on the couch and opened a box. There he found a photograph and a watch. He realized that these were found things that he always carried with him. He took the photo and realized that he even carried a picture from the movies with him. He looked at his pocket watch and picked it up. He remembered how he would give them to his brother so that he could successfully pass the entrance exams. He turned them over and I saw the engraving. It wasn't necessary, but he could still use the watch. His brother smiled and thanked Hyung. They were sitting on the couch, and Hyung said with a smile that he knew everything, to which his brother said that unlike electronic watches, such pocket watches are more durable and reliable. After that, he asked what was written on the back. There were the letters J and W. He realized they were his initials and asked what they meant. My brother said it was his last name. Hyung said that the initials were misspelled here, and he said to give him the watch back. The brother laughed and said that he would tell engraver Woo about it and ask him to correct it. My brother said that this is not necessary, he will wear them anyway. The adult Hyung sat on the couch holding this watch and knew that in the future, if he had to sign somewhere, he would write his name like it was written on Sun's watch. He gripped the watch in his hands and realized that it was working. He looked and saw that the hand of the clock was indeed moving. He wondered if his brother would ever hear this recording. He stood up abruptly and said to himself that if his brother was listening to this recording, and then most likely he was no longer in this world. Hyung looked at his watch in fright and wondered if it wasn't a hallucination, but there was no other device inside the watch. His brother was apologizing to him, and it was hard for Hyung. He wanted to find medicine for mom, and I think he'll be back soon, but things didn't go according to plan. Hyung shook his head, not understanding. He opened his phone, where an ad was written on October 9, 2013. It was written that if he could climb all the way to the top of the obelisk, then he would be able to fulfill his dream. He then thought it was spam, but apart from the strange content, there were no other signs. They asked whether he agreed to participate or not. If it wasn't for his circumstance, he would have ignored such a message about. But suddenly the image of a sick and skinny mother who was currently in the hospital popped up in front of his eyes, so he hopes that he can help her by clicking the agree button. From that day on, he began to have quite strange dreams, and on October 12, 2013, what he saw then was not a dream at all. He was completely sure that everything that was there was real. He saw strange creatures that looked like elves and dwarves. It was a world inhabited by orcs, trolls, dragons, and other fabulous creatures. There was also one tall tower, which was located in the very center and looked directly at the sun. Others said that if you can climb to the top of it, you can become equal to God. But all this did not interest him at all. He only thought about the elixir that could cure any disease. On October 28, 2013, he gathered a team of like-minded people and started climbing the tower. Over time, it has become quite difficult to combine life and reality in parallel with this. He was standing in front of the tower, and on November 9, 2013, he decided to leave home and thought that it would only take him 6 months to achieve his goals. He cut off all contact with reality, and on December 1, 2013, their team became known as Arsha. They have been improved in absolutely everything. On September 7, 2014, due to the fact that the process of conquering the tower slowed down, he needed another 1 year. On November 11, 2015, he had a disagreement with one of the higher planes. This created a huge hindrance to their plans. On February 31st of an unknown year, negotiations broke down and war broke out. On the second day of an unknown month and year, the allies of the hostile clan were completely defeated. On March 4th of an unknown year, he had a loved one. Hyung stood and drowned in all these thoughts, and on September 19th of an unknown year, the war broke out again, and on January 2nd of an unknown year, the war was still going on and they all had a very hard time. He stood there with a blank stare, and on June 6th, a traitor appeared among them and the clan began to disagree. Everyone started suspecting each other, and on July 1st, 2017, his body became heavy and he was clearly poisoned. On October 30th, half of the people left the clan and they continued losing, and his body slowly collapsed. On November 1st, his lover stabbed him in the heart and left his body to rot. On the 30th of an unknown month and year, he wanted to see his brother. On February 1st, 2018, he was still one in Arsha, and he did not understand where he could have made a mistake. He was standing on a battlefield where there were bursts of lights, and on February 28, 2018, he managed to get an elixir, but he had no way to send it home as he was surrounded by enemies. Only now did he realize the whole truth, that there was only one person in this world that he could trust despite all this. He wasn't going to show them his weakness. His brother said that was why he would leave these notes here, and if his brother heard them, he would definitely find an elixir and bring it to his mother. Hyung clutched his watch with a trembling hand and continued to sit on the couch. He wound up his watch, and he listened as his brother said that he would also hear the recordings. Hyung sat there until the evening, and then he raised his head and a message flashed in front of him saying that he would continue what he had started. after his body began to be permeated by an incomprehensible power and he realized that it was the kind of power that could control people living in this world. Hyung lifted his head up and his body tensed. He had relived all the memories I had just heard about, and his face was covered in blood, and he was standing in his armor. He slowly closed his eyes and the system message wrote that the wake-up had ended. The information transfer process was not yet complete. He was asked to prepare his body for receiving the information. 5% was uploaded. At this stage, the receptor setup was not yet complete. Hyung looked ahead and didn't understand anything. His physical abilities were ready. The feature is known. Added skills. Player registration was only possible in the obelisk. A window flashed up in front of him, where the name, characteristics, and features were written. A special feature was composure, and also there was an increase in feelings and perception, a forecast of time. He decided to find out what really happened to his brother and clenched the watch in his fist. He decided that he would understand who had left him to die and why he had never been able to return after 5 years. His eyes filled with rage, and he decided that he would bring him back home and destroy all the enemies that his brother had. He put his hand to his chin and stared at the status window. He knew that this was really no different from a game. He thought that after the awakening was over, this system panel said that his body would be adapted to the game, but his skills were clearly too slow. His character was cold-blooded and he would show equanimity in any situation. He was completely immune to brainwashing. He realized that his character wasn't too bad, and he also had an art from Dragon Sight. The Dragon's Eye could easily detect even a lie. He could also see the skill of a person or object in advance and partially. He realized that Jong had told him that he had met the ancient dragon Kalitutsa and formed a contract with it on the 11th floor. He assumed it was the remains of that contract. He also had the sharpened senses skill. 5 basic senses have become significantly more acute. He will realize that most likely he has received an aggravation of feelings at the expense of his character. He realized that he was most intrigued by the last skill because he was a clairvoyant. He glanced at his watch and assumed it was because of it. After that, black waves appear in the sky, and they were right in front of Jun, and later developed and a black door appeared in front of him. He was going to show them who was on the other side and find out what they were up against. He walked in the door, and from that day on, he's Cha-Jun. The system message said that he entered the ground floor where the training began. The white light shone directly into his eyes, and he covered himself with his hand. After that, he opened his eyes and didn't understand how he got here. He got up and looked down the long corridor. This place was exactly the same as it was in his brother's diary. He realized that the tower was designed as an entrance exam for players. It gave players a chance to become gods. If someone wanted to climb the tower, they first had to prove that they were capable of all of this, and training was the place where the player had to prove it. He knew that there were people higher up who had made his brother suffer. He recalled all the memories, and he thought that he should have waited just a little while and he would soon pass through their souls. He opened his backpack and realized that to get into the tower, he had to fill a good bill and clear out the training. He understood that this requires not just a good score, but huge ones. Worse than the first place did not suit him, and he put a mask on his head. He understood that there were also hidden goodies that were scattered throughout the training. He needed to collect as many of them as possible to improve his weak body to the maximum. Before he started climbing the tower, he decided that it was worth collecting as many trumps as possible under his sleeve to focus on all of this. After he went forward, something began to glow from above and a voice rang out. He said he was scared because he wouldn't be able to meet him again and he would just leave. Jun picked up his Slovak and saw someone approaching him. He raised his weapons and saw a goblin in front of him who was wearing a suit and had a monocle on his head. The goblin said that it didn't matter how good-natured he was, but if Jun acted like this, he would get hurt very badly, and then he asked to put away his knives. The goblin spread his arms wide and said with a smile that he was glad to see him. He said that he was the manager of the ground floor and was also Ibulker's guide. He said that it was possible to meet in this way was prescribed by fate, after which he suggested that Jun applaud him. Jun looked at him and said that the manager's advice was pretty simple to ignore, but he thought it was worth at least listening to. Goblin said that Jun already knew what was going on and he thought Jun was very shy, so he was wearing a mask the whole time. Goblin said that since Jun was already familiar with everything, it would be a little easier to communicate with him than with others. He said that the training was divided into 7 blocks from A to G. He said that each block had its own weather conditions and a task that needed to be completed. He said that Jun had to complete as many tasks as possible in the time allotted to him. He also said that depending on the quality and number of completed tasks, he will receive points. When he can complete all the blocks from, the total score will be calculated and announced. Jun asked what was the goal of getting more points. Goblin said that he was sure he explained this part well. Jun asked how much time he would have for everything. Goblin said that he would have 30 days for everything, and how he would divide that time between blocks depended only on the player himself. He put his hand forward and said that at the moment, 1 week has already passed since the first round. He asked if he would like to join him next week. Jun knew that the strongest team was probably already too far away, so far away that it would be impossible for the newcomer to catch up with them, but in any case, he expected it. Goblin said that, in addition, it was recommended to pass blocks in teams of 3 or 5 people. Based on the above, if Jun will pass everything alone, otherwise he will be able to get the most points. The goblin smiled and said that in the tower, the player received the same amount of points as he put in his work to achieve them. His score will be calculated based on what he did when completing tasks, so he doesn't have to worry about it. Jun sat down and began to warm up. Goblin thought to himself that usually players like him would take one of two paths. They either believed to the last in their own strength and went alone, after which they died, or they did something that he was very interested in watching. He raised his hand and snapped his fingers. He said that if this was his final choice, it was now, and it was starting right now. The system message said that the test floor 0 was starting. The test was like this: a novice trying to become a god and to climb to the top of the tower. Jun had to prove that he had all the necessary means to do so. Deadlines: he had to go in the allotted time. The goblin bowed to him and the report began. Jun walked forward and stepped over the white line. The system message said that he entered block A. He was asked to defuse or destroy all the traps in this block. After that, something started falling from above and Jun noticed it and dodged to the side. He realized that the diary said that a huge number of traps were in this block, but the location of these traps was unknown to him. This information was not particularly useful to him. Jun did a somersault forward and then his briefcase hit. He looked ahead and saw that the arrows had pierced his briefcase and almost hit him. He hesitated and realized that they were made of metal. He stood up, holding his briefcase, and realized that he needed to lean against the wall and try as hard as possible not to put his body in danger. After that, one more trap was immediately activated and it hit Jun, injuring him. After which, he walked down the corridor, leaving behind traces of blood. The system message wrote that he felt unbearable pain, thus his movement was slowed down. He stopped and clutched the arm with the arrows sticking out of it. She wrote to him that thanks to his cool-headedness skill, he didn't show any signs of being able to move around more now that he had developed a tolerance for more. He thought about it and knew it was dangerous, but he didn't think it was that dangerous. He'll go crazy if this continues. After which, he took the arrow and pulled it out of his hand. He took the cotton with tweezers and set it on fire. He found a wound and wrote to him that he was exposed to fire, thus his movement was slowed down. Thanks to his cool head skill, he didn't show any more signs. He was now able to move around safely, and he gained resistance to burns. He walked forward and realized that all the arrows that flew at him had come out at a certain moment, and there was also some faint signal. He needed to find the right moment. Trying to find the arrow with his eyes was simply useless here, since it was too dark and he had to listen to the gears. He knew that if he could do this, he would be able to easily determine where the arrow would fly from, and in this short period of time, he needed to catch the sound it would make. He closed his eyes and used the sense sharpened skill. His sense of touch sharpened, and he began to feel 0.8% better. I entered in the dark and heard the gears move and looked up. He threw his sword into it and was able to destroy the mechanisms. He smiled and knew that it wouldn't be difficult to find them now. He rushed forward, dodging other traps, and depending on how well he handled the arrows, his stats improved. For example, if he dodged blue arrows, his agility improved, and if he parried a red arrow, his strength improved. He walked forward and caught a yellow arrow. If he praises her, it's better with stamina. He looked at his stats and realized that the better he increased his stats, the more profit he would get from the quest, which was a place he still needed to look for. As he walked forward, blood came out from under his mask. He wiped it off with his hand and realized that it was a shame that he couldn't increase his MP, but even so, he could still use the opportunity to improve the skills he needed. At this time, someone was watching Jun. It was purchased, from which there were many screens of different players. He knew that he was getting more and more interesting to watch, and that the guy was clearly standing out from all the others. It was strange to him, since he was much more interested in watching the bloke from the block than the people from E. He raised his hand to his chin and realized that this guy was a talent. Even if he could handle all of this, he would still have a lot of dangers on his way. But if he was smart enough to handle the steel ones, then this training floor was going to be very entertaining, said the goblin and adjusted his monocle. The system message wrote that it has reached the end point. He upgraded his stats and his skills. He went ahead and realized that all the characteristics except for the MP pretty good improved. Earning that much in one day, he thought it wasn't too bad. He clenched his hands into fists and realized that his physical strength and maneuverability, stamina, and destructive power had become much better. He opened the door and a system message said that treatment for his wounds was starting. He felt a strong energy that enveloped his body and looked at it in surprise. And the crows recovered, and he realized that this was a place where players could take a break. He realized that he would finally be able to take a deep breath. He leaned down and immediately closed his eyes. Some unknown person was surprised that Jun had passed out. He raised his hands and woke him up. Yeon-Woo was startled and tried to step back. He didn't understand what kind of guy was standing in front of him, and he was sure that the heightened senses was still active. But how was he able to sneak in here unnoticed back then? He asked if this guy was a mysterious merchant. The guy threw up his hands and said that he was very glad that Jun knew who he was and that he was looking for an expensive buyer. He decided to introduce himself and said that his name was he was an ordinary merchant who passed by. He held up his hand and said that from time to time, a merchant could appear between the blocks in the break room to supply the player with the necessary items for a certain fee. From this seller, you could buy everything that only comes to mind: food from, artifacts, and other useful things. The merchant opened the menu and said that with Jun's permission, he would show them what he had. He said that he was a salesman who could sell everything that exists in this world, and if he needed something, just let him say. Jun began to select from the list of items and calculated Medusa's venom, golden goat's horn, Taemin's left eye. These were all extremely rare artifacts, and there was no way ordinary players would be able to purchase such items. Jun knew that he couldn't rely on artifacts and abilities right now, so he needed to focus on physical abilities. He found what he needed, a reset ticket. Jun could go back to the selected point. Jun asked how he could pay for the items. The merchant said that he could do this with his own accounts, he just had to give the appropriate amount. The seller said that they all have a conscience, so they inflated the prices of items. Jun started to choose from his items and realized that the mineral water was worth 2 power. He considered it a robbery. He said he'd like to buy something. The merchant brought his hands together and Jun said that he wanted to exchange all his points received at the time of passing the block and for a reset ticket. Return it to the beginning of block. Jun stood with the window open, and the merchant asked him that he wanted to buy a reset ticket. Jun confirmed his words. The merchant noticed with a smile on his face that Jun was the first person who was interested in him, because people usually ask something that would help them get to the next block, but they haven't gone back a block yet. Jun replied that they just needed to do something else in that block. The merchant started scratching his chin and stood there with a smile on his face, saying that everything was clear to him, but in his head there were thoughts that Jun was quite an interesting participant. The merchant began to explain to Jun how to use the ticket, presenting everything in miniature. All Jun has to do is rip up the ticket anywhere, so he'll be transferred to the starting area right after that. The merchant then immediately began to disappear, saying that it was time for him to go and he hoped that he and Jun would meet again. The merchant completely vanished in front of Jun. The notification said that all the statistics points that he received at the time of passing block will be taken as payment. And then he began to smoke, feeling his strength leave him. But immediately after that, a notification wrote to him that he was getting 10 refund tickets and they fell right into the palm of his hand. Jun doesn't hesitate to tear them apart. The ticket glowed with a very bright light, so bright that it blinded Jun a little. The notice said that he was on the ground floor, where the tutorial starts, and Jun was standing and looking ahead. Then the test began, and Jun picked up his dagger with the thought that he would gain as many stats as possible. Arrows began to fly at him, but he calmly deflects them with his dagger. Then he leaned forward and watched with a blank stare, thinking that this was his last run of the tutorial, because by improving his senses through training in the tutorial, he was able to achieve that synesthesia in his hands works like clockwork. Jun was standing without a mask, and there was a dragon next to him, and he was thinking that the dragon eye art was a skill that allowed him to partially use the eyes of truth of the ancient dragon Kalatatsa. And when he first used this skill, he was shocked at how many opportunities had opened up before him. In front of him, the corridor was completely colorless, and he did not understand what was happening, because the entire color palette in his eyes simply disappeared, and all he saw was a white background and black lines. These were lines that let you see the outline of an object, even a person, and his brother called this phenomenon the word gel. But here, Jun is already standing behind the closed door, and the notification says that he has reached the end point. Then he started looking at the stats window and calculated that it took him about 4 hours, so considering it took him 34 hours the first time, that's pretty good. In his stats window, it was noticeable that his stats were noticeably increased, and Jun believes that this will be enough to match some of the top players. In front of him were the dark silhouettes of these top players, and he was thinking that they must have already reached blocking. So if he was even a little bit behind them, there was no way he would be able to catch up with them, so it was time to start racing seriously. Jun started to open the door, and he went straight into the room of the boss of Block A. Jun was peering ahead, thinking that he needed to clear out Block A and Block B, so Jun ran across the room in a flash, knife in hand. Fire arrows flew at him, and he swung his sword to ward them off, then easily broke all the arrows, considering that their speed was much faster than he expected. The notification said that his strength was improved by 1 point. He parried another wave of arrows, knowing that he couldn't stop for a second. Suddenly, something startled him very much, and his legs began to shake. After all, under it, the floor just collapsed. As he hung in the air, he saw that he would fall directly onto the sharp spears, which would mean instant death. Jun decides to spin around in the air, and then pushes his chest forward, which helps him. And that's why he was able to jump over that chasm. His agility had improved by 1 point, and by that time, he had already landed on the other side of the chasm and was looking up. He saw a huge flame that he had to pass through. Jun swung the knife, and then, with a single swing, made a path for himself that he could pass through. And so he immediately started running through it, gaining resistance to burns along the way, as well as improving his sense sharpening skill. After Jun ran out of the fire, a log started flying at him. And he didn't notice it at first and almost got hit, but at the last moment he was able to dodge. There were a lot of notifications that said that his agility and stamina had increased by 1 point, as well as his sense sharpening skill had improved. But then he was hit in the stomach with a fist, which hurt him. Jun flew backwards and skidded to a stop with his feet. He was looking at the person who had hit him, but then he realized that what he was looking at was a brass scarecrow that exactly mimicked the player's movements and actions, and was also able to attack within a certain distance, Jun remembered that his brother had mentioned these things. Someone stands in front of 3 such monsters and thinks that it can copy the skills of players and use them with even greater power, so if a person is able to defeat it, then they have access to the boss room. But if he can't defeat it, then it's like being bound by a sword and chain. Jun took the knife in his hands and was ready to attack, realizing that there are only 2 ways to defeat this monster, and the first is to destroy it directly in the forehead, and the second is to stab it. Jun used the dragon's eye. His opponent was completely blank, only the outline of his form visible, and because of this ability, he saw the black clot that was in the monster's chest, so that was its weak point. Jun started to defend against him as he made another punch. Suddenly, someone shouts to Jun that this thing is moving due to sensors, so he needs to find them and destroy them. Jun is surprised by such a guest and dodges the monster's blow. Then he swings the knife around and thinks it looks like the guy he noticed when the sense enhancement was activated. Jun pierces through the black matter, saying that he himself knows perfectly well that they are moving due to sensors. The scarecrow exploded from the impact, and the guy who was watching him was standing there in shock. He opened his mouth in surprise because he thought it was impossible. Jun started to stare at him intently, which really scared the kid. Jun started walking up to him and thinking that it had taken so much effort to find out that he was using his sensors to use an enhanced version of his own skills, something that the average player would never understand. Jun was getting closer and closer to him, and he was already 2 heads taller than the kid himself, and he didn't understand how the kid knew about the monster's weaknesses. The guy started asking him what he was going to do with him, and Jun noticed that he looked rather weak. They stood and looked at each other, and Jun asked what he was going to do to him, and the boy shouted at him, repeating his question of what he was going to do to him. Jun calmly looked at him, said that he didn't seem to be going to do anything, and then asked the question, how did he know that the copper doll works due to sensors? He is very interested to find out. The guy calmed down and was a little confused, not even knowing what to say. The entire doll was covered in a blue aura, and the guy said that he could see the magic threads surrounding the copper doll. At that moment, Junyi realized that he could see magic, which meant that he was very much connected to it, which is quite rare even among those who can control it. Jun was still looking at him and said that how he sees and controls magic is what interests him most at the moment, so he would be very grateful if he could teach him how to do it. Jun knew that if he could learn this technique, it would help him a lot when it came to learning how to control magic. The guy asked him why with a surprised look on his face, and Jun added that he didn't ask him to do it for free. They were standing in the middle of an empty hallway, and Jun said that he understood that the guy was stuck here for quite a long time, so he would help him get out of here. It was quite a good offer for him. The guy got scared and hesitated, just standing there in silence. Jun turned around and started walking away, saying that he wasn't going to force him, so the kid immediately started to stop him. He looked at his back and asked him if what he just said was true, that he couldn't control magic, and Jun said that he didn't need to lie. At the same time, the guy pointed his finger at that doll and shouted that it was impossible, and that he wanted to say that not knowing how to control magic, at least someone can handle this thing. They both stared at the copper doll, and the boy thought that in normal situations, no matter how many skills or physical enhancements a person uses, the doll won't even get a scratch, but Jun is able to deal with him in a couple of blows while not being able to control magic. The kid looked at Jun and didn't know who he was, and then, in a trembling voice, he said that he would help him. He raised his hand to his chest and introduced himself. His name is Yeol. They started walking somewhere, and Jun said that he was going to open the passage, so Yuli should just follow him. Jun then turned to him with the dragon eye skill used and said that he had one question. Yeol began to worry and tremble, listening carefully to him, and he asked him why he was using this particular shell. Jun stared at him intently and added that his current appearance was just a hoax. In the body of Julia was a second shell, apparently real. This is what Jun noticed, saying that judging by his real shell, he is still about 10 years old, so he is probably far from ordinary people. Jun put his hands on his waist and told Yeol not to forget to be polite, because he wouldn't be nice to him just because he was a child. Jun was in some kind of fight, waving his arms with a blank stare. He broke those copper dolls one by one. Jun leapt at another doll, swinging his knife, and as he landed, he plunged the knife right into that black core. Yeol was standing around the corner and looking at it from the side, but his face was such that words couldn't describe how surprised he was. Jun then turned his head slightly to Yeol and said that they were almost at Block B, so shouldn't he fulfill his end of the bargain since they were already there? They were walking somewhere ahead and talking. Yeol said that he didn't know how he would react to the fact that he could see mana flows from birth. Jun looked ahead and guessed that maybe it was a skill that completely depended on his genes. He understood that this was very rare, but there were some cases, and there were also cases where some unique and supernatural skills were passed down through genes. Usually, such people pass on their special traits from generation to generation. A guy starts to emit white smoke, and Jun continues to think that this skill is awakened in the descendant, giving him new opportunities, after which the descendant passes it on to his descendant. As they continued on, Yul told him that he was one of those people, and that the skill he had inherited gave him the ability to see and feel magic. He gets the feeling that something strongly connects him to magic, and this helped him learn the structure of that doll. Jun immediately thought that his case was similar to Young's. The green core was spinning, which is what Jun saw in his brother's idea of a skill, because it had the character of a perfect adaptation. It was compatible with everything that exists, including mana. Jungkook reached out with a smile on his face and was covered in mana. Jun knew that unlike ordinary people on Earth, he didn't have any difficulty working with mana, and even if he found and repaired a lost item, he could use it like his 5 fingers. The dragon stood with its mouth open. Jun only knew about his brother because his companions said they were surprised at what he was doing, because he was the only one chosen by the ancient dragon Kalatats, only because of his gift. And thanks to the fact that he could communicate with anything, he was able to inherit the basic dragon skill while other people couldn't. Yul started talking about mana, imagining the river and saying that technically these people are geniuses, and he thinks that this is not the case. As for mana, Jun can think of it as a river and magic is water coming out of a hill or reservoir, passing through this very river. Jun stood scratching his chin thoughtfully. Then notifications appeared in front of him that he had cleared block as a solo player, and he also received something that many people find quite difficult to get, so he was given an additional karma in the form of 500 points. Jun stood and read these notifications, and then looked at how much karma he had, and he had about 800 karma points. Jun understood that karma is very important in the tower, it is the basis of this game, and the administrator can give it out as a reward, and it can also be used as currency when exchanging for some items between players. Jun started to open the door, still thinking that as a player, he needed to collect as much karma as possible, and he had only completed block A, but he had already collected so much that people would be surprised if they knew about it. There was a bright light behind the door, and he knew that it wasn't enough for him, so he needed more and as much as he could muster. The notification said that he entered Block B. There was a huge room where players were walking around. People gathered in squads, preparing for the next block. Someone was left without limbs, passing these blocks. Jun just entered the room as they began to look at him with incomprehension. What kind of mask is on him? And in general, it's already been a week since the tutorial started. But are there any people left? They were surprised that he apparently was able to pass block. A Jun turned to Julia and asked what's he worth, maybe he'll finally get in. Yul was trembling all over and was genuinely glad that he was able to get here. He looked down at his hands and said that he was finally able to do it. Then he notices someone looking at him. It was some kind of team of guys. They all looked at him with disgust, and Yul was very angry with them. Young noticed that Yul was very angry, so he asked what his team was, and the guy said that they were his team, but now he wasn't going to deal with them. They both started walking on, and Yul asked him what he hadn't told him about them, and Jun said he hadn't, but only talked about mana flow or something. They sat down on the steps and began to talk. Jun was surprised. Because Yul is quite well informed in magic, it was quite difficult for him to understand, but he still got a general understanding of magic and mana in general. Then Jun, looking at him, said that he now roughly understands what magic is, but then asked how it is easy for him to start controlling it, and it is better to let him generally say the easiest way to start feeling it. Yul started scratching his head and saying that he didn't know, because he only knew how to control her from the very beginning, so it's quite difficult for him to explain how to do it. Jun said that it was rather sad, but there was nothing to be done about it. Then I turned my head at him and told him that he would wait for the tutorial to finish and then go home. Yul said that he would, and Jun said that then they would go their separate ways. They parted, waved at each other, and Jun started to leave while Yul's team came up to him. Jun heard them call out to Yul, so he turned around. That same crowd was standing in front of some man who said that he liked that flame in their eyes, so people like them were born to do great feats. It was a man with short hair and a cape on his back who introduced himself as Bill, Arendon's representative, and said that he would be waiting for them in the waiting room of Block B, so if they got there and decided to continue playing, they should team up. The blonde-haired guy happily exclaimed that to think they would be able to join Arendon, and the other guy replied that by joining them, he would become part of an invincible group that completely defeated the tutorial. We are transported to the same block with copper dolls, where this squad was just fighting with dolls, and one of the guys shouted that these dolls could not be bypassed. The blonde-haired boy stood there and drifted, thinking that they were in trouble, because if this went on, they would never be able to complete the tutorial, much less leave it alive. Suddenly, with startled eyes, he looked sideways and saw something. It was Yul, who was angry at the dolls. He looked at it and thought that Yul's ability was to analyze the flow of magic. He didn't think that it was of much use since he was constantly standing behind. Suddenly, he decided to do something and grabbed Yul by the scruff of the neck and dragged him, and Yul asked him what he was doing. This bad guy threw him right into the crowd with these brass dolls and started yelling at the rest of the team to run away. Yul was reaching for them and shouting. He watched them run away and shouted, not understanding how they could do such a thing. And so, we go back to the moment where they spoke to Yul in that bright room. He went all the way to the waiting room of Block A, expected to meet some good friends, and then he told them that they had nothing to talk about. These guys looked upset and asked how he was able to survive that. Yul made the sign of the cross on his hands and told them that it was none of their business. And then, with an angry expression on his face, he said that he didn't know what they wanted from him, but asked them to leave in a good way, because they probably couldn't all look him in the eye properly after what they did, and he didn't like to look at them. They all approached with a sad expression on their faces, and apparently their leader, a guy with blonde hair, suggested that Yul pretend that nothing had happened, and they were just strangers with him. Suddenly, he bowed and asked for forgiveness. Yul was already taken aback by this, and Yul said that he would do anything for him, as an apology for what happened, but in return he wants Yul to tell no one and nothing, and Yul does not understand what he is saying at all. The guy with the blonde hair closed his eyes and started to tell me what happened not so long ago, but then changed his mind and said that if it comes to details, it will be very difficult for him to explain, but he once again asks that Yeol not tell anyone anything. Then they all started bowing down and begging him not to tell them anything. Yeol shouted in displeasure that he didn't understand what they were saying at all, but told them to finally leave him. He didn't want to see their faces anymore. And then he just turns away from them. The blonde guy started to think that he shouldn't leave it like this because he had already told Bill that Yeol had sacrificed his life for them. The blonde guy started to get very angry, realizing that he could still tell someone, because if this happens, he will lose his position for which he worked so hard in Arendon. The guys started looking at each other, and then he started walking with a very angry expression on his face right towards Yul and thought that the first time it was very difficult for him to betray him, but the second time it would not be difficult at all. They were standing far away from everyone and behind a small hill, which is what this guy understood, saying that they are in a place where no one really looks, so it will not be difficult to get rid of him unnoticed. He started to approach Yul and prepared to draw his sword, realizing that Bill wouldn't even know what Yul looked like because he could tell that it was a victim from the boss room. He almost grabbed the hilt of his sword, when suddenly Jun appeared behind him. He said that the Arendon group in the tutorial is directly connected with the Blue Flower Island, so they recruit newcomers from there. But the people from the Blue Flower Island are very capricious, which makes them feel uncomfortable around people with a sad past, and they wouldn't have been able to cope with what Yul went through. Instantly, Jun cuts off the guy's arm before he even has time to turn around and ask who he is. Then suddenly he starts crying and yelling in pain, and his whole arm was bleeding. Yul heard this and turned to see what was going on. He noticed that Jun had started a fight with the entire squad all by himself, while the blonde guy was screaming like a little girl. Jun looked at them and thought that he could have gone to Block B in peace, but after he found out that Yul had been betrayed by his own allies, he simply couldn't stay away. Then he closed his eyes and remembered that this situation with Yul had reminded him of someone. He remembered his older brother, who had been similarly stabbed in the back by his allies. The two guys were holding their swords, and their faces were filled with fright. They both don't know how long ago he was there, because they both couldn't see him. Jun stood with a knife in his hand and said that if they were going to stab someone in the back, they should be prepared to stab themselves in the back. The blonde guy called Jun bad words through his pain, then asked him how he dared to do this to his hand. So with his other remaining hand, he grabbed his sword and shouted that he would kill him. Jun noticed this and looked at him, then instantly grabbed his arm. Well, I started breaking it, wishing him luck in this. Jun's eyes were cool, and he added that he would help him become an invalid. The rest of the team was shocked and shouted at him that they didn't do anything to him, so why was he meddling in his business? Jun, still holding the bandit's hand, said that he was just doing what he wanted, just like them, and the words hit something inside the boys. They looked at each other as if they were about to cry, and Jun ordered them to drop their weapons. And then he began to wring the bandit's hand harder, telling them to drop their weapons. The blonde guy screamed in pain and begged them to drop their weapons. The boys obeyed and threw their weapons on the floor, and then, looking at him, they asked him to let Kane go. That was the name of the blonde bandit. Jun started to smile through his mask and laughed at them. He put his foot on Kane and broke his arm, pinning him to the floor. He screamed, but soon lost consciousness. And the other boys said that they didn't agree on this, but that's bad luck. Jun wasn't going to negotiate with them, so he slapped him in the face with all his might. He flew away covered in blood, and the boys were scared. They were angry at Jun for this, so they took up their swords and charged. And he was already standing with his knife. Jun also started running towards them. He put his hand to his neck, and then I ran past these guys, cutting them. There was blood on his knife, and they screamed as he sliced their legs open. Jun turned to look at them, then immediately slammed his fists into their faces. So these two guys fell over and passed out. Yeol looked at all this with his mouth open and didn't even know what to say. He looked at Jun and thought that he knew Jun was strong, but not that strong. Then Jun went up to Yeol and said that his saliva was running, and he was surprised and started to wipe it off. Then Jun looked at him and wished him luck in life and that he should be more careful when choosing people. Yeol shivered and couldn't say a word as Jun walked away from him. But then he still shouted his thanks after him and added that he would definitely become strong one day, just like him. Jun stopped and turned to Yeol. He saw Yeol holding his hands up to his face, shouting at him, and Jun also shouted at him to look at the flower garden in Prussia sometime. He looked at it and added that it would be useful for him. Then he turned away again and walked on. Yul clenched his fists, wondering what kind of flower garden this was in Prussia. Yul looked ahead with a spark in his eyes. At this moment, a guy with red hair was watching Jun's fight. He had a big smile and stubble on his face. His clothes were full of holes, and he told his friend to take a look at the guy's fight. But he noticed that his friend was sleeping, so he started to wake him up, saying that he had already had enough sleep. That kid woke up, started yawning, and then rubbed his eyes and said that he always wouldn't let him sleep properly. The red-haired man squatted down and asked if he had seen what had just happened, but the sleeping boy said he didn't know and asked him to tell him. The red-haired guy began to tell me that the same group of guys who thought they were superior, who went around showing off, saying that they were about to be accepted into Arendon, and now it looks like they just got their way. The sleeping boy began to stretch and replied that in general, it was not worth expecting anything else. It was clear that with their character, they would not go far, and in general they were not particularly different from ordinary children. The red-haired guy noticed that he was surprised that the dark-robed man was able to easily defeat them all by himself. Immediately, the sleeping boy's eyes lit up and he turned around, asking what he really could do alone. The red-haired guy sat and looked at him, saying that it was in the waiting room of Block A, and all this indicates that he cleared Block A like a solo player. The sleeping guy was very surprised by this and added that he was incredible. The roof of this waiting room was domed and also looked like glass, but this wasn't it, and the sleeping guy asked him that he said that this guy beat up the guys from Arendon, which means that soon, people in blue and white clothes will try to get revenge on him. The red-haired guy replied with a smile that, to be honest, those guys were nothing more than candidates, and started giggling from there. Then they sat and looked at each other, and the red-haired man said that this was why he was interested in his opinion. Maybe we should take him with us, because he is a lone player, which means that he has no friends or allies here. He is such a one of a kind. The sleeping guy began to rub his chin and replied that he wasn't quite sure about it, because they could still set the people in white and blue on themselves with this. Then the red-haired guy got up and asked with a laugh when he started worrying about these questions. And the sleeping guy also started giggling and said that he really did. And then the red-haired guy said that he was going to take a look at this guy, asking if his partner was coming with him. He looked at him, called him Hyun, and asked him to drop the case. But the man just turned one eye on him and said that he didn't want to go. The sleeping guy started to get up and asked if he was crazy or something, and then with a bright smile on his face said that he just loves to do it. There were 2 notifications that said that the test of Block B is starting, and then they said that there are 4 passes in Block B, so you need to choose one of them. There was Jun, who had 4 doors of different colors in front of him. He thought that the doors were built according to their complexity. The more right the door, the more difficult it is, and his brother chose the blue door, the second from the left. The words of his brother were, "I decided to make life easier for myself and my teammates, because Block A seemed incredibly difficult to us, and therefore I chose a path that will be much easier for us." But after a while, he found out that he had made a huge mistake, because as it turned out, in Block B, the possible number and quality of drop items strongly depends on the color of the selected door. Jun immediately went to the back door, wanting to get Bathory's vampiric dagger. Jun started to open the door, and then a notification appeared in front of him that he had chosen the back way. Jun appeared in a certain room with a river where he had a task to overcome the pond and get to the other end alive. This is not a simple pond, but created from water released from the giant Mimairu, which suddenly died while carrying it in itself, and the pond is also full of wildlife. Jun noticed a rock lying nearby and kicked it straight into the pond. The rock fell there with splashes, and while it was sinking, it instantly began to break up into small pieces. Jun looked at it and guessed that this is not ordinary water, because its density and pressure are completely different from ordinary water. This water will instantly kill the person himself. At the same time, Jun activated his dragon vision. Everything was no longer colored, but a black cloth appeared on the wall, which he noticed. He touched this wall with his hand so that the passage in the wall began to open up. In front of him was the dark stairway down which he was about to go. The notice said that he had found a hidden passage, a room of ice and fire, and he also received 300 credits for this. Jun was walking down the stairs, and the notice said that he had entered the dungeon. Suddenly, he found what he was looking for. In front of him was white moss. This is moss that can be found in caves. It contains the spirit of the moon. A person who has tasted it may have a stomach ache, and it also tastes unpleasant. Jun knew that even though the black path was always the most difficult, there were many ways to overcome it, and one of them was white moss. He imagined the stomach aches of a person who tried it, because white moss is a miracle drug containing the spirit of the moon, which is why many local animals use it as their main food source. But at the same time, white moss is not compatible with the human diet, which is why it will not be able to extract the necessary substances from it, or in the worst case, it will earn itself abdominal pain. Therefore, most people avoid white moss. This moss was like smoke that was floating everywhere, and Jun kept thinking that the secret that his brother found out after a while was that it should be consumed together with other ingredients. There were insects under the moon, and Jun knew his brother's secret that the bodies of creatures like insects and animals that eat white moss as their main food source had evolved to a stage where they could artificially release heat from their bodies, so that they could feed the energy of the moon. This type of radiation starts from the heart, which takes on the characteristics of a flame. Jun turned to the side and continued to think that on the other hand, the properties of moss are very similar to ice, which helps to acquire the signs of water. He understood that if he used the heart and moss at the same time, the 2 completely different properties would be absorbed in it, which together formed a miracle drug that strengthened his body and muscles. There was a huge centipede crawling behind Jun, and Jun knew that the human body was very fragile, so it could very easily stop functioning. The centipede was crawling right over Jun's head, and all he could think about was that with strong muscles and a strong body, it would be much easier for him to fight. He picked up his knife and started to turn around, apparently able to spot the enemy. Then he threw his knife. And the most interesting thing is that he got right in the middle of the centipede, and just what he needed was a heart and white moss, and it all turned out to be nearby. It was a red centipede that feeds on white moss, and since this creature lives in dark caves, its eyes have atrophied and developed other senses. She prefers meat more than white moss. There were 2 notifications that said that a flame monster had appeared, as well as a secret quest that said that he needed to kill as many monsters as possible, because if they escaped outside, it would be a disaster. Jun was attacked by another centipede. He initially started running away from her, and then he decided to cut it all the way through, but his knife just slipped, which made Jun wonder how strong it was. Jun was already standing with 2 knives and thought that this monster didn't even move after such a blow. Its shell is very strong, and before that, the thrown saber had quite a good effect on it, but not enough. Jun stared at the monster and continued to think that not only can he not know how strong the red centipede is, but he also doesn't know the depths of the dungeon. He understands that he needs to deal with it as quickly as possible. He uses dragon vision and looks directly at that centipede. Under her head was that black cloth, her weak spot. Suddenly the centipede began to crawl across the ceiling, and Jun knew he had to find the right moment. Immediately from the ceiling, this centipede jumped down on Jun, but he dodged and even managed to touch its shell. After successfully dodging, he was able to get closer to her and then swung his knife, driving it into her carapace with all his strength. But then I was very surprised because I realized that there was another shell inside that monster. Jun turned his head in surprise, and it was her tail that was attacking him. With this attack, she was able to throw it into the wall. Blood gushed out of Jun's mouth as he felt a lot of pain. They wrote that his internal organ was damaged as well as poisoned. Jun sat on the ground and realized that he had 4 broken ribs, 2 fractures in his spine, and blood thinning in a vein in his left hip. He closed his eyes, then abruptly opened them, conscious again. The notification said that his state of shock was cancelled, as well as the poisoning was cancelled. Jun grabbed for the knife, and the notification said that he had received the skill of resistance to the laws of nature. That centipede jumped on top of him again. He also gained the battle urge skill, and immediately afterwards, he plunged a knife into her mouth. He looked inside her and shivered, but then he abruptly jumped back, sending her flying into the wall. Jun looked at her and realized that he could punch her in the stomach, so he swung and stabbed her in the stomach, and then I just started cutting it in half. He was covered in blue blood. Her blood was gushing out from under the knife. The ground was covered with her footprints, and after he was able to kill her, he lay down on the ground in pain. He turned his head to look at her, and that centipede's eyes stopped shining like before. The notification said that he will receive an additional reward for a strong enemy. Jun began to remove his mask and crawl. There was moss and blood ahead of him. Jun grabbed the moss and then ate it. Some particles formed in his stomach, and while he was wiping his mouth, he approached the monster, and he began to cut him again, and then he took out his heart and began to bite. We flashed to Build, who asked them what had happened. The guys sat broken and did not know what to say. Build was standing with his hands on his waist, looking at them. He thought that as soon as he left his place for a while, they were already beaten. He thought that they were quite strong, but apparently not. He started to get angry and look ahead, thinking that knowing that Eren cared about his members, someone still decided to do this to his people, which meant that they ignored them. Build turned to his subordinate and asked that this guy was wearing a white mask, and the latter confirmed his words. Build scratched his chin and thought about it. Then he started walking somewhere, and his eyes were angry, and he knew that the first thing to do was to find that masked man. Build began to stare angrily ahead. The system message said that Jun had successfully dealt with the red centipede. Jun was able to master an invincible enemy, and he received additional merit points. Jun ate the heart of a red centipede, and through interaction with the properties of the white moss, an uncovered effect was discovered. Broken bones were repaired and strengthened, and damaged muscle tissue was repaired and strengthened. The number of monsters killed was 1. Jun was able to gain knowledge about the heart of fire and the ice seal. Jun lifted his head and exhaled. He understood that thanks to this hidden corridor, he had obtained the reinforcement of his skeleton and muscles as well as the fiery heart and ice seal. He opened the system panel, and even though it only sold for 1.5%, but he found physical strength, and with it the speed of energy recovery. He looked at his stats and realized that the stats were obtained for killing 1 red centipede, and there were a lot more of them compared to what he got from completing the boss location. Although the low MP level was still a disadvantage, but he didn't know if he could do anything about it. Right now, he was relying on his own abilities, and in the future, he would need to use a lot more magic, and the higher he advanced, the stronger he would become. Dom still understood that, whatever it was, this was not the end, and the Dragon Body Shop strengthening a person's body was in order to use it to its full potential, but rather to obtain from the Dragon Kalitutsa the necessary magic power he would be able to use it. He decided to take another look, and no matter how hard he tried, no solution came to mind. Similar to physical stamina, it was effective at taking physical damage. The rank of this skill was E, and the skill level was 7.2%. It increased the power of resistance to physical damage. In some cases, it may have worked better than it is. In the niche, understand that this tax minimizes the impact of enemy attacks and mitigates the pain. He recalled the battle and used his cool head skill to maintain his sanity throughout the entire passage. However, there were still some moments when he experienced terrible suffering, and that was certainly his spirit first, so if he used this ability appropriately, he would be able to avoid similar situations from happening again. And in the case of poisoning, burns, frostbite, panic attacks, hallucinations or curses, then similar resistance to it was also normal. He understood that it wasn't such a skill, but all of this skill could provide him with a great support. He chose the skill Accelerating Thoughts, and the rank of this skill was D+, and the skill level was 3.2%. Under any circumstances, his unyielding spirit burned with the desire to fight. Thanks to his accelerated thinking, he was still able to simultaneously focus on the duel and make quick decisions in battle. Jun knew that this was the most important thing, and in a critical situation, a quick decision could be the key to saving the allies, but it could also be the worst way to destroy them. He understood that in the battle with the Red Centipede, he could also win thanks to this skill. Jun looked at all this with a smile and realized that he was able to get an improvement of 2 skills, and it was quite good, and besides, it was difficult to get a D+ rank in training. Jun put on his mask and went to slay the bats. The system message said that he had successfully dealt with the bats and the number of monsters killed was 147. Jun was standing on the ground, and there were many corpses of mice on the floor. He started to pick it up and realized that he seemed to be getting used to it all now. He pulled out the fangs and claws of the bats and realized that it was white moss mixed with the poisonous blood of a red centipede. He poured this solution on the claws and fangs, then he would get a powder containing the fire properties of monsters. The ground began to envelop the entire mass and turned into red dust. He realized that if it was set on fire, it would cause an explosion of unimaginable force. He filled this dust into his bag and tied them around his waist. Jun looked up and realized that the next one in line was the blue ants that were guarding their eggs, and there were quite a lot of them. They were blue nomadic ants. The size range ranged from 30 centimeters to 1 meter. About 100 ants clustered around the queen ant and formed a single colony. Jun realized that the peculiarity of the ant colony was that ordinary ants were willing to risk their lives to protect their territory. He realized that facing off against 100 monsters was just crazy. He realizes that the problem was that Bathory's Empyrean dagger was located outside of this room. The Vampire King was one of the long-dead monarchs. Many say that it was enhanced by drawing out about someone else's life and strength and even abilities, leaving behind a lot of destruction. There were still a lot of players and even clans left who hadn't recovered from the damage they had caused. The lower the item's rating number, the cooler it is. And since this dagger was a legendary item that belonged to the deceased Vampire Kingy, the level of its rating was also quite low. A 3-digit rating meant that this artifact was among the best and one unique item for all training in the tower. The rating of this artifact was 352. Jun realized that he couldn't back down from this and he had to fight them face to face, but he knew that it wouldn't work that way and he should try a little trick. He reached up with his hand for the bag containing the explosive mass and threw a few of them in the direction of the ants. They scattered and kicked up red dust. The ants started examining the powder and Jun lit a lighter and threw it in the direction of the ants. The red powder instantly flashed and the ants flew away. The system message said that Jun had successfully blown up an ant's nest. 217 blue ants were defeated by the explosion. 89 strong ants were burned. Jun was able to get achievements thanks to this. He picked up his knife and started to deal with the other ants. He looked to the side and realized that most of the ones he managed to destroy were either cubs or unhatched eggs. Jun put his hand on his neck and knew that there were still a lot of adults left. He looked in the direction they were coming from and realized that he could deal with these guys even after he already got into the Empyrean dagger, but now he decided to move on to a more dangerous matter. He looked ahead and a huge ant appeared in front of him. Jun raised his dagger and the ant stood up on its hind legs. The system message says that the boss queen ant has appeared. Ants looked in Jun's direction and kicked out with his foot. Jun came back and realized that there must have been a door somewhere in the ant's nest. He looked around and found her. Jun took 3 daggers in his hands and threw them towards the ant. Jun rushed forward and delivered a few cutting blows. He was able to chop off the ant's leg and it fell to the ground. While the ant was lying down, other small ants were running up to it. Jun went to the door and opened it. He looked ahead and entered the temple of the Vampire Queen. In the front was a room where a green fire burned, and in the front was a statue of a vampire. He looked at it and saw the blade. He immediately realized that it was Bathory the Vampire Queen. He realized that this was what was called the Empyrean dagger. The classification of this weapon was one-handed. It was part of a unique category. The description was this: the Vampire Queen's favorite weapon, with which she sucked the blood of her opponents. Jun smiled and was glad that he could finally find him. It was a hidden item and would help him close his unrealistic gap to the leaderboards. This sword was famous not only for its outstanding impact power, but also for the fact that it could apply a bleeding effect on the opponent with the special option Bloody Aptly. But the real value of this artifact was contained in its last option. Jun lowered his head and reached for his dagger. He took it out of the statue, and his hand started to get covered in dark energy. Jun twisted his face and realized that Bathory's dagger was choosing its master. He realized that if the choice didn't go his way, then his spirit would be completely consumed. Jun wondered if among all the players who entered the training, there were those who could handle this blade. Jun held the blade in his hand and knew that at the end of his long studies, his brother had found a way to handle this blade that even beginners could handle. Jun put his hand on the table and realized that others would say he was crazy. He swung the blade and for some reason his hand began to blacken. Originally, the Bathory dagger was an ability that was hard enough to understand. The greedy Vampire Queen didn't want her power to fall into the wrong hands until the day she died. Black spheres began to rise from Jun's hand. Jun realized that this was why she had sealed her true abilities and appearance in this blade. The system message said that the seal was broken and Jun's hand was covered in dark energy. He realized that the seal had been broken and Bathory's true vampiric dagger was at the 66th ranking. Skill level was at 0. The description was as follows: the real appearance of the hidden powers of the vampire queen Bathory took away the opponent's life force and absorbed it into the soul. Jun extended his hand, and it was covered in Bathory's power. Jun realized that this was already an entry into the Empyrean dagger and bloodily accurately dealt fatal damage to the target, as well as applying a bleeding effect that took away the opponent's physical and magical strength. The goal was such that under the effect of bleeding, the victim continued to receive a certain amount of damage corresponding to its impact power. Jun understood that this was a unique ability that even the best player in this tower could hardly obtain. The power of the Vampire Queen was such that it completely absorbed life abilities and took away parts of the opponent's skill level. If the skill level reached its maximum, the probability of stealing the opponent's skill increased according to a certain coefficient. Jun smiled and looked towards the door with the mark on it. He decided to try out new abilities and easily defeated all the ants. One of them attacked Jun and he jumped up and climbed on his back. He looked at his hand that had the mark on it and pointed it towards the opponent. He told it to absorb it and the system message said that the mark had started absorbing the monster's life force and energy. The skill level of the ability in Bathory's Empyrean dagger has been raised to 1.1%. The system message said that Jun had absorbed life force and energy. The level of strength was increased by 1, the level of physical strength was increased by 11, and the boss queen ant was completely destroyed. An additional merit was obtained and the level of additional merit reached 300 units. The body of the defeated ant boss had completely dried up and was lying on the ground. Jun stood looking at the other ants and the blue ant's fighting spirit level was lowered. The ant's nest is being destroyed at a rapid rate. After which, an unfamiliar voice rang out, which was surprised that there was such a place. Similar places. Hyung turned to his friend's side and asked if he was there. The man yawns, covering his mouth with his hand, and says that if he doesn't believe them, they could go back. Hyung put his hand on his companion and asked who was doing this and if he really didn't care. He looked in the direction where there were many corpses of enemies and said that someone was hunting monsters here without stopping. He was surprised that this player was able to increase his skills and stats so quickly. He didn't think that these monsters themselves had suddenly become weaker. Hyuna's friend noticed this and said that it sounded funny, but the guys from the lower floors opposite were getting stronger and not inferior to those who advanced higher. Hyung said he knew it, but it didn't sound like someone was making a joke. The companions called out to Hyung, and they looked at the boss corpse that had been dried up. Hyung said that they were completely drained of energy, but he couldn't figure out where the player was able to find such a thing. He recalled that when they were searching, they could find even the slightest hint of something like this. He couldn't believe that there was a hidden room here and that player was just able to pass Blaga alone, and he also got his hands on a rare artifact and even a hidden ability. He thought for a moment, then put his hand to his chin. He realized that it wasn't so easy to find such a talented person, and it was likely that rumors would soon spread all over the place. In this case, he will be able to get into the eyes of other clans who want to get it, and then they will have nothing to do but just have time to lure him to their side. They started looking around the room and noticed monsters running away from somewhere. They looked at each other and realized what they had to do. The system message said that the brown salamander had been destroyed. She fell to the floor completely dried out. The number of monsters killed was 1,000. The maximum allowed quest conditions were met. All the parts of the fire heart and ice seal were collected. The fire heart and ice seal were completed and they affected Jun's body and his body began to change. Jun looked down at her hands and they began to glow. The system message said that he had received an enhanced skeleton. He looked at the window and with the help of Bathory's vampiric dagger, he was able to absorb the monk power of the monsters. Compared to before, his stats were able to increase dramatically, and in particular, he had a new feature that was a reinforced skeleton. The description was that the energy of fire filled his heart, the energy of ice filled his body. By fusing together, the properties of fire and water increased his immunity level and resistance power. His body was now accumulating much more slowly. Jun realized that the skeleton's strength was making his body stronger and it was not so easy to defeat him, and he also had an increased recovery rate, which helped him reduce damage even in a critical situation, but there was also one reason why he needed this ability. The system message said that the development of his body was confirmed. The physical shell has been reinforced. The restoration of lost hereditary abilities has begun. It started loading and the current recovery state was 21.3%. Feature imperfect dragon body changed to low-level dragon body. Jun realized that in order to complete the restoration of his inherited abilities, he needed a stronger shell. Enhanced skeleton, this was a mandatory ability that helped him with this. He was offered the choice of whether he wanted to register his name as the training rating was updated. Jun clicked the refuse button, and he knew that if he agreed, it would not give him any advantages, but rather attract a lot of attention from high-ranked players. Registration was cancelled, and he looked at the training rating. He saw himself in 281 places. He realized that it was certainly a good thing that he was able to move up in the rankings, but the difference with those who were ahead was still very big. He didn't understand what players like Edora, Pant, and Kang were doing. He realized that this wasn't going to work, and he had to speed up even more. He looked away and walked forward. He heard that there were other players here, but he didn't see anyone here while he was fighting with the opponents. He picked up his dagger and assumed they were after him. He realized that these were the guys he had encountered when he was helping Yuli. He looked ahead and threw his dagger, and it flew towards Hyung's partner. He fell to the floor and Hyung bravely stepped forward and knocked out the dagger. He fell on the floor and with a vicious expression on his face asked what he was doing. Jun asked if they were from Arandon. Hyung asked why he thought that, and Jun asked why they were following him. Hyung asked why he thought it was possible to just suddenly attack like that. Jun asked how you can just pursue a player without making your intentions clear. He said that of course he couldn't expect anything good, so he attacked. Hyung and his partner lowered their heads and apologized to him since they were the ones who were stupid this time. Hyung and his partner looked at each other and Jun asked why they were following him. Hyung pointed a finger at him and offered to become their companion. Hyun's companion pointed a finger at him and asked him to stop all this because it was all awkward. Jun, watching all of this, thought they were fools and turned around and walked forward. Hyung asked where he went because he wasn't finished yet. Hyung grabbed his hand and Jun asked if there was anything else he wanted to say. Hyung again offered to become their teammates, but he didn't answer. Jun said it was impossible because he didn't know who they were and what they were doing. He said he wasn't attracted to team play at all. Hyung pointed at himself and asked if he really didn't know him. Jun asked why he should have known about it, and Hyung became desperate. He didn't understand how Jun didn't know about him. It was one of the best in the world. Hyun's companion started clapping his hands and said that he was the most good-natured, but his flaw is always showing off, so talking to him can sometimes be very tiring. But still, he asked Jun to understand that Hyung wasn't a bad person at all. He said they should have introduced themselves first and given their names. His name was Doyle. Doyle smiled and said that Jun had confused him a little and it might be a little suspicious that they were still here. He said they should have been at ERF level. Before Doyle could finish, Jun said he believed him. He used the ability of the Dragon's Eye to understand that although he had recently learned about it, when he looked at a person with the Dragon's Eye, he could learn something useful about them. If the aura from a person was barely noticeable, it meant that their way of thinking was different. And if the way of thinking was negative, then it was the other way around. His aura was supposed to be completely filling the body and would also be clearly visible. But Doyle and his companions' auras weren't bright, which meant they weren't lying. He didn't understand what was the reason that people were busy accumulating points and came from the previous zone to ask him to join their ranks. Doyle said there was something he needed to know. He asked Jun if he happened to be a member of any clan or team. Jun said no, and Doyle said that to tell the truth, there was one artifact in Sector E that they should have per square meter, but that was impossible only if the group consisted of at least 3 or 4 players. Jun asked if they couldn't find people there who could help them, to which he replied that most of the players in Sector E had already decided on their membership in a particular group. Jun realized that finding someone with abilities in Sector was quite difficult, but he didn't understand why they had chosen him since he hadn't done anything like that in the waiting room of Sector B. He supposed they'd just noticed that he'd gone through Sector on his own and killed Kane's group. Jun closed his eyes and realized that he had finally managed to attract attention in this way. He asked if they really needed to get an artifact that was difficult to get even if rank 3 and 11 players joined forces. He asked if they really needed help. Doyle said it was like that, but he couldn't explain it. Jun began to think, and he needed Hargan's crown. Poe is a hidden lair that was accidentally discovered by his brother's team. Since the owner of this log is the Lizard King Hogan, he was very fierce and strong, and it took a lot and everything to defeat him. The reward given out for killing him was the Hagon crown, and it increased the number of greatness points and gave leadership skills. He didn't need it, and his brother was betrayed by his own team, which he trusted. It was a ruthlessly natural selection tower. Once you open your back, you never know when you might be attacked. He understands that in such harsh conditions, there should be no reason to abandon his comrades or subordinates. But this could happen to a couple of people. It was an easy way to get rid of someone. Doyle said with a smile that they would not be left in his debt if Jun had something that he wanted very badly, then they were willing to give it to him in payment. He asked how he liked the offer, and Jun began to think about it. After all, it was a hidden lair, and he would be able to get good stats there once to spend some time, but it won't be much damage to him, and even vice versa. Jun agreed, but said that he had one condition. He said that all the rewards except for the artifact that they needed so badly, he would get for himself. They agreed, but also added that Jun should also show himself with his abilities. They reached out to Jun and said that their meeting was fate. Jun shook hands and understood that this place was a battlefield and there was no need to tell his real name. He needed another name that he could speak to strangers. He introduced himself to them as Kane. And now, notifications have already appeared in front of him that he has passed Cherna. Branch of Sector B is a solo player. He received an achievement that is not so easy to get, for which he is awarded additional merit points. And at this rate, he went through another Sector C and entered Sector D. In front of his feet lies a goblin and shouts that people have already come and they are very strong. But Jun kills him in cold blood. Hyung was standing behind him and was a little worried when he saw him wiping the blood off the knife. So Hyung's thoughts were such that he didn't understand what was going on with this guy. Was he the one who was wrong? Is it even possible to level up skills so quickly? Jun started to open the door to the next section. Notification said that he had completed Sector D as a solo player, and all of his stats had been restored. While walking on the grass, he was told that he had entered Sector E. Jun was covering his face with his hand against the light, and Hyun was warming up, saying that he was tired, and Doyle was rubbing his eyes, saying that he would have slept now if it wasn't for the light. It is narrated that the tutorial is divided into two large areas on the inner and outer sides. In the inner part, players in the main, sensibly assessing their abilities, move from Sector A to Sector D, trying to quickly pump up the missing skills. Jun recalled walking through all the sectors and then looking out over the expanse. But in the outer part, you cannot upgrade your skills, which means that in zones from E to D, you need to establish yourself based on previously obtained abilities. Jun noticed something, and the notification said that the E-Zone trial had begun. He had a small blue coin in his hand, the so-called token. The notification said that the tokens are hidden throughout Sector E, and the found token can be exchanged or transferred to another player. In total, you need to collect 99 of them to confirm your abilities. Hyung looked at Jun and said that he was very annoyed. But Jun just looked at the token and remembered those words from the notification, realizing that all those words also mean that you can forcibly take them away from the player or kill them and steal them. Jun imagined players standing with a knife and a villainous smile, because he understood that all the tokens are very well hidden, which makes another 98 very difficult to find. But it is much easier to take away from other players, so it is quite obvious what the players will choose. His brother had told him that it took a lot of effort. Jun turned his eye and was still thinking about his own business. He turned to the guys and thought that it didn't look like Hyung was interested in the tokens. So maybe he had already collected enough before he returned with a return ticket to the Sector B waiting room, or maybe he was able to collect all 99. Young looked at him and said that he got the task, now it's time for them to act, and didn't Hyung say that there is a hidden room here, so he wants to deal with it as quickly as possible, and at the same time collect tokens. But Hyung told him that there were some differences here, so it would take quite some time. It is said that Sector E, compared to the previous 4, is much larger and more extensive, and in each zone the landscape and environment are different from each other, and each of them forms a unique ecosystem. To the east, the sharp black cliffs rise, and in the west there are vast plains, through which rivers flow. In the south, there are low hills, but at the same time, a dense forest is growing in the northern part. And also in the very depths of the northern part there is a swampy area, so the types of monsters living in different zones are very diverse. Outside the forest, mostly small monsters like goblins and kobolds live. But if you go deeper into the thicket of the forest, you will already meet large monsters such as trolls and orcs. The swamp is home to humanoid lizards. Both orcs and sandworms can be found in the western and eastern territories. As you fight these monsters everywhere, you can find hidden tokens, as well as even more dangerous players to avoid in order to save your tokens. The three of them went forward through the forest, because their goal was the north, or rather the swamp. We're transported to some armory where someone is talking. It was some head who was asking that the guy who broke up Kind's group was joined by Kang and Doyle. But why are they? Shouldn't these guys be in Sector E? His subject bowed and replied that they didn't have the exact information yet, but they would try to find out since they hadn't been seen in Sector E recently. And there is an eyewitness who says that he saw people similar to them in the waiting room of Sector B. The head looked at him with a very angry look and asked that he also knew this. The guy replied that he didn't even think that these two could be in the rookie zone, but it seems that now there is no doubt. At the same time, the head started banging on the table and shouting at him, asking what they should do now. Did they take the same guy to the team? The subject replied that apparently it is. The head was angry, baring his teeth and thinking that if there was some truth in this, then it also applies to them. But then he started looking down and realized that this masked kid was only making things worse for himself, ignoring Arendon and Blue Flower Island. The head got up from the table and put his hands on the table, telling him to call all the members of the organization, and the subject bowed and replied that they were already waiting outside. The head took up his sword and shouted that they were all going after the masked guy. But here we go back to Jun, who was sitting by the fire. Jun sat and stared at the fire, thinking that he had already reached this point, that time had passed quickly for him, and that he had hardly rested yet, only chased forward. He looked up at the sky, where there were 2 bright moons, and remembered that the sky in Africa was the same, and after all, his brother also loved such calm and silence. But suddenly he turned at a noise, and then he looked at Hyung, who was sleeping soundly, and Jun reflected that Hyung and Doyle were different from other players. They were always smiling, but at the same time, no matter what they did, they were always full of confidence. They have something that other players don't have. He looked at Doyle and realized that they were acting as if this was the norm, that is, their daily routine. They were used to it. These guys are amazing people. He remembered them in battle, standing next to each other, and it surprised him that sometimes their talent for mutual understanding, which they show in battle, is amazing. It's not like they learned it separately. After all, basically, during the fight, Hyung performs the functions of physical attacks, while Doyle acts with his mind and regulates the situation. It is thanks to this that they can find out how and when the enemy will attack. It seems that they trust each other very much. It is unlikely that they met a couple of days ago. They've obviously known each other for 5 or 10 years, or even more, and the brotherly relationship is not so simple. They trust each other with their lives without even thinking. It wouldn't be possible if they didn't have enough trust in each other. Jun was still staring at the fire, and his mind was still racing, wondering what kind of relationship the two of them had, but one thing was certain, they weren't siblings. They are so professional and not so simple, but unfortunately, he He can't know the reasons why they became so close. There was fire in his eyes, and then he remembered the two of them standing there laughing at something, and Jun knew they both looked really good. The fire crackled from the boards, and at that moment Jun decided that he didn't want to know any more about their relationship or get any closer to them. But just the sight of them reminds him of his brother, who was brighter than sunlight. Jun raised his head up as he continued to dig deep, and he finally realized that the deeper the night, the more useless emotions appear. He was going to get rid of all these confused thoughts, but on the contrary, they became even more. When suddenly he saw that the guys started to wake up. Hyung stood up and started stretching, while Doyle rubbed his eyes. Jun asked what was wrong, because it wasn't his turn to watch yet, and Hyung said that it was very noisy right now, you can't sleep like that. Doyle started to yawn and also added that they couldn't leave them alone at all. Hyung also noticed that it was getting annoying. He was about to go over and deal with them himself, and then he apologized for waking them up. With a smile on his face, Doyle replied that it was fine, he was still too stiff to sleep in the same position, but now they could just stretch out. Hyung started warming up, and Doyle asked him if these people even knew they were here, or if they just happened to run into them, and Hyung said he didn't care at all. Hyung started to draw his sword and walk forward, saying that the important thing was that he had a sword. After he came to the bushes, he just started cutting through the bushes, and blood flowed out of them. A whole bunch of kids were standing right behind these bushes and saw Hyung, and then they started shouting that it was impossible that they even noticed them. I decided to spread out to make it safer. Hyung immediately chased after them. He dealt with the fleeing guys one by one. Some midges were flying past Jun. It was Doyle who was controlling them with gestures. Jun looked at Doyle's confident face as he commanded these midges to move forward and was surprised that he had a talent for taming insects, which is quite a difficult talent since you have to deal with insects that have a low level of intelligence. All these midges started attacking people and completely covering them, and they screamed. Their screams could be heard all over the forest. Suddenly, Doyle turned to look and then saw two thugs approaching with a knife to Jun, who was sitting and looking into the fire. Doyle started to smile, knowing what was going to happen to the two of them. They got as close to Jun as they could. And here at the most interesting point, we are transferred to the story that Fran and his team of the most active scavengers in Sector E, they all really liked this work. A guy would step on another guy while holding a bag of gold in his hand, and they would use tokens that can be taken away as an excuse, but they would also steal players' possessions and artifacts, and so they have significantly raised their physical strength level, and they can also resell the tokens they take away for a high price to higher ranked players. A person's hands are tied and they are being led somewhere because there are places where the players themselves are needed as a resource. These same players are consumable materials for experiments, just employees. Their goals may be completely different, but the seller does not care at all. Some kind of syringe with blood and green liquid. The same guys who sneaked up on Jun swung a knife to stab him in the back, because these guys are hunting high-level players like Hyung and Doyle. Because the thing is, you don't know for sure how many tokens these two have or what artifacts they have. The guy started to stab me right in the back, but surprisingly, there was no one under his blow, so the knife just stuck in the tree. And Jun was behind the bandit in the blink of an eye, and then he finished him off with a single blow. This kid fell to the ground covered in blood, and the others looked on and shouted what he did to their boss. So they decided to attack Jun with daggers. Jun also started running at them in response, and killed two of them in no time. Then he dodged the third guy's punch and made an upward kick, killing him as well. The others just started running away from Jun, but he decided not to leave it like that, so there was a white trail coming out of his eyes. After a while, they were all killed, and there were 21 of them. Jun steamed around with the corpses until Doyle came up to him and told him that they had spent quite a lot of time in Sector E, and Jun added that he had collected 81 tokens. Doyle was surprised by this, but said that they probably sold most of the tokens, and this was just a start. Since more than 1,000 people entered this sector, they could encounter some of them repeatedly, so it's not surprising that they collected so much. Jun turned to look at Doyle, who told him that they were probably scavengers, so they were able to collect so much, because the majority of players do not have more than 10 tokens. Jun replied that there was a saying that the poor get poorer and the rich get richer. And then Jun thought about it and said that in truth, in Sector E, there is nothing left but to become a winner, because a minority of strong players take tokens from the majority of weak ones. And weak players have no choice but to give everything to survive, otherwise they will simply be pinned down and taken away by force. No matter how they do it, strong players still get tokens very quickly without much effort. This token resembles a bright blue bead. On the other hand, weak players always lack tokens, so the higher you go in the tutorial's ranking, the more noticeable the difference in player strength. Doyle watched with bright eyes and replied that in any case, they squeeze the maximum amount of tokens out of the players, regardless of the method. This is also not bad for leveling up stats, and if you meet a mysterious merchant, then the tokens can be used as currency, and now Jun can take all the tokens for himself. Jun looked at him blankly. Hyung and Doyle were standing next to each other and smiling, and Doyle said that they hadn't paid him an advance on their deal yet, so he could assume that this was him. There were clouds in the sky in the middle of the night, and Jun asked if they didn't need these tokens, but the guys said they had enough of them, so it was fine. Jun opened his backpack and tossed the bag of tokens into it, thinking that the best place to get extra points was actually Sector E. And besides, the monster he wanted to catch before he even entered the tutorial must be somewhere nearby, so Jun should definitely catch it. Jun looked down and kept thinking that right now he should increase the amount of magic power that was missing, and he could also complete the restoration of the ancestral skill. The snake was covered in darkness, and Jun decided that as soon as he dealt with the Lizard King, he would immediately go after that monster. It was still night and there were 2 moons in the sky, and after a while the children gathered wood for a new fire. Hyung dusted off his hands and said that now they will have enough trouble with their opponents, so they should be on their guard. Suddenly, something covered Jun's face with light, which surprised him. This is how Doyle used his control magic to build a fire. Jun shouted that it was amazing, and he just closed his eyes and smiled. And then looking at the fire, he replied that these are fire insects because if there is a predator that intends to eat them, they ignite themselves to set fire to the enemy. There are a lot of amazing insects in the tower. Jun turned to look at him and wondered if there were things in the tower that even his older brother didn't know. It was a bright sunny day outside, and there were screams in the middle of that forest. It was Jun who was slashing at his enemies. He cut the lizards with his knife. All around him were the corpses of those poor lizards. Jun started to cut open the lizard's head, which Hyung noticed and asked why he was doing it, and Jun replied that the humanoid lizard's eyeball could be used to make an artifact that would give a special buff with a powerful effect. This is a small white ring with crystals, a giant with dozens of eyes and hundreds of hands, a weapon that is called Kisu because when you make black Kisu from the eyeballs of humanoid lizards, you get very important material. Doyle noticed something underfoot, and then he told Hyung to take a look. Hyung turned around and said that someone must have been here before them. They noticed footprints and blood among the bushes. Jun crouched down and started touching the spot with his hand, and then looked at the bloody hand and said that not much time had passed since the start of the fight. Hyung rubbed his chin as he listened to Jun's reasoning, which seemed like it had been a quarter of a day. They all understood that the hidden room was just that it was hidden. These rooms are hidden throughout the tutorial and play an important role in boosting players' morale and giving them an incentive to compete. Doyle, a little thoughtful, asked if they were the same people. They knew that the hidden room they found could no longer appear in the current round of the tutorial, and if other players had already found the hidden room, Hargan's lair. This means that Hyun and Doyle's attempt to win the hard crown was in vain. Hyun was standing on top of Jun, and Jun was saying that there were only one-way tracks here, but there weren't any going back. So it looked like the people who came here weren't looking for her at all, and Hyun didn't immediately understand what he was saying, so he asked again. And Jun, looking at these footprints, told Hyun to take a look too. There was a paw mark in the ground and something that had been dragged along the ground. Hyun was looking at the tracks, and Jun also noticed that they were dragging something on the ground, most likely that the humanoid lizards were dragging some kind of bait and lured the players there. Then they stood up and were at a loss. Jun began to tell him that monsters are not just prey for players, but sometimes they themselves, on the contrary, become predators that target players. And in my head immediately there are thoughts of how monsters attack from the back of people. After all, this is the territory of monsters, and they know it much better. Of course, from time to time there can be all sorts of traps. Without this there is nowhere, and it seems that these situations are best dealt with as you go along. Hyung's face became a little displeased, and he himself said that these monsters really irritate him. But they can't be distracted by such things, and Jun thought that it would be easy for him, but still cool-headedness remains cool. Then he notices that Doyle was very angry, as if he was about to cry. But suddenly Doyle calms down and looks away. He looked at Jun and smiled, and Jun just stood there and said nothing. Then Hyung stood behind him and said that they hadn't discussed everything about their case yet. Jun turned to the boys, and they started saying that this was where Hargan's lair was, and Jun was thinking that since he was still pretending not to know anything, it was best to keep it up, so he asked what the lair was. The weather was beautiful, and Hyung said that they had killed a bunch of humanoid lizards on their way to this place, but what about their king? Well, he lives right here. Jun listened to this and said that he must be strong, and Hyung said that he was very strong. He and Doyle can't handle him, but Jun asked if he would interfere in the fight. Hyung looked at him and hesitantly replied that in this case, the situation will change a little, but it will definitely be clear that it will not be easy. After all, in addition to the male, there is also a female in the inner part of the den. Then they were facing each other and Hyung said that no matter how hard they tried, the three of them wouldn't be able to kill them, only die themselves, so Jun asked what they should do. Hyung narrowed his eyes and said that they would steal the artifact. And then he began to tell them his plan, that they would first lure the male outside the den and then detain the female inside. While Hyun distracts the male, Jun quickly attacks the female, and then Doyle would just pull the crown off her head. They looked at each other and Jun asked the question that Doyle would go behind. To which Hyung replied that of course, if you want to steal something, then it's best to go behind, but still the female is very strong. There was nothing Jun could do on her own, so there was no way he could fight her, just distract her. Jun stared at him and realized that whatever it was, he had done a lot of missions on the battlefield in Africa. He remembered sitting in the grass with a gun and taking aim at the target, because he didn't rely on chance. He was then a soldier who had to obey orders from above, but now he is actually a mercenary working for a reward. Standing in the middle of the sunny forest, they decided to start their plan. The notification said that they had entered the battlefield, and now a new area of Hargan's lair was open to him, for which he received an additional 500 points. There was a guard of several lizard men with weapons at the entrance, and as soon as they noticed the guys, people started shouting around them, and the guys were preparing weapons for the attack. Suddenly, a male started running out of the entrance. The notice said that the Kargan boss appeared, covered in blood, shouting and asking how people dared to invade his territory, so they should not expect mercy from him. A huge window of characteristics, which describes the quest, and when you kill one of the strongest bosses in this sector, a good reward is given. Kargan charged, growling as he did so. He stood in front of the guys and began to squeal, which the guys already began to close from him. Jun thought about how this was the first time he was experiencing such intense tension. Even when he first got into the tutorial, he didn't feel this way. Jun shielded his face from the wind and felt like he was back on the battlefield in Africa. Then, he started glaring at this boss, and the boss in turn started glaring at him. Kargan got angry and looked at him, but then he started swinging his sword at them. Kargan ran to Jun and told him to die. Suddenly, Hyung ran out in front of Jun and blocked Kargan's blow with his sword. That sword flew into the ground with a loud bang. Kargan started shouting in frustration at Hyung to give up, because he couldn't beat him anyway. Hyung looked at him with a smile and replied that he wasn't the same person anymore. The boss threw a punch that Hyung dodged. Suddenly, the boss was very surprised and opened his eyes wide. What he saw was that Hyung just started walking away from him. The lizard started to feel uneasy and asked what their boss was doing, but the guys had already entered the cave. They went deeper and deeper. After walking a little further, there were a few lizardmen standing there again, guarding the place. Jun killed them instantly, throwing knives at their heads. Doyle stared at him in surprise, but the man just stood there, calmly looking ahead. Suddenly, they heard screams for help and turned their heads to see where it was coming from. In front of them was a cage, with bones and blood lying behind the wall. The children stared at this terrible picture, and out of the cage stretched hands and broken faces that begged for salvation. Jun stood and watched it, thinking that it looked like it had something to do with the abduction marks they had seen at the entrance of the lair, and this was the place where the abductees were being held. Jun was looking down and flying in his thoughts. This human dungeon is a kind of food storage facility for these animals. They can come here at any time if they want to eat, but if they release the guys, they can't take the crown from that female. June turned to look at Doyle, who was standing there with a very sad face. So June said that she could show up at any time, they should hurry up and find her, and he needed to hide. Doyle turned to Jun with a very sad face, and then shouted that he wasn't angry at all. Jun didn't understand, so he asked why he should be angry, and Doyle came closer and held his chest, saying that he really didn't feel anything when looking at such a sight. Jun knew it was probably because of his young age. The walls of the cave were lit by a torch, and Jun at that moment replied that he was also a person. Just because he wasn't angry didn't mean anything. Doyle doesn't understand how he can be so cold-blooded. Doyle held his chest as June told him that they were coming here for the boss and that Hyung might be in danger right now. June looked at him and told him not to forget that Hyung was currently in a fierce battle with Kargan. He couldn't handle it alone, and the longer they dragged on, the more danger they put him in. Doyle listened to all this and thought about it. Jun continued that first of all, they should make a sensible decision, because if they do not allocate priorities, then nothing will work out and he will leave here, and it is not clear what will become of them, whether they will survive or die. Jun answered him as sensibly and coolly as possible, looking the same way. Doyle stared and squinted, as if he was torn between two thoughts. Then he slapped his cheek with all his strength and looked at Jun, apologizing and saying that he hadn't thought of that. Then he went ahead, saying that Hyung was waiting for them. Jun looked at the bones and then he had a plan, because it seems that the female uses this dungeon with people to feed her young, but what if you try to use it somehow? June told Doyle to wait, and Doyle turned around in surprise and asked what was wrong. June said that he had a good idea, and then he asked if they could adjust their plan a little. After all, if all went well, they would be able to save these people. Doyle was very happy with the news. Jun put his hand on his belt and said that those fire insects that he used last night, they would need them very much. A huge baton hits one of the lizards, and the second one who was standing next to him was shocked. The female screams, "How dare these people come to them?" She was standing there with that club and asking them why they were here for her kids. In the nest were small dragons, red and blue in color, and the female told those lizards to protect her children at the cost of their lives. She noticed the guys, and they noticed it too, so they told each other that the lizard queen was standing there. The female was standing in front of Jun, who was holding a small bag in his hand. Jun held it up and asked her what she liked about fireworks. The female, startled, asked what he was talking about, and June just threw the bag right at her kids, which made her a little scared. The female immediately ran towards them, screaming. She was able to hit the bag with her bat, but it burst and there was red dust everywhere. The female still has a scared face. Jun looked ahead and thought about how it was the same powder he used on the ants, then called out to Doyle, who was already ready to release all his insects. Doyle had set this female on fire thanks to his insects, and Tak was screaming in pain. She covered herself from the fire with her hands and called them pathetic. But then her eyes fell on something that gave her the creeps. It's about June standing with a knife at her kids' throats. He took them by the scruff of the neck, and he just killed her because blood was flying everywhere, and the female was screaming at him to let him go, and how dare he. Jun had already released the dragon's corpse, saying that since they considered humans to be mere cattle. And then he took another dragon, and also put a knife to its throat, saying that they should understand that they themselves can become the same, isn't that right? At that moment, the female rushed to Jun to save her children. She looked down at her feet, and there were Doyle's insects, so it ignited all over and exploded in the same second. After a while, the female was already lying dead and burned. The notification said that Boss Taragon was defeated, so they got extra merit points, and the morale of the humanoid lizardmen was reduced as Hargen's lair descended into a state of panic. Jun went to her corpse and said that humans and monsters can't coexist together. He was looking directly at her, and the look in his eyes was almost sympathetic. Doyle started running towards him, and Doyle told him that they should finish the queen and go to Hyung's aid. Doyle picked up the crown and then held it up to him and was very happy about it, saying that he finally got it. At the same time, they heard a heart-rending scream, so they turned around to find out the reason for such a scream. It was the same blue male who saw what happened to his children and the female. He ran to the female and put her on his lap, shouting her name. He was very scared, you could see it from his expression, and Hyung was standing behind him. Hyung was surprised that they were able to defeat the female, but he was very tired of running after the boss. The male began to shout with all his might and squeeze the dead body, saying that he would avenge her. It closed its mouth on her. His body began to tremble, which is exactly what the guys noticed. There was blood everywhere and notifications that Boss Hargen had used the saturation skill, so he had successfully absorbed Targan's power. After which, he used transformation and entered the second phase. His body instantly grew and shone with a red aura. Hargen started swinging his sword, which was exactly what June noticed, so he yelled at the boys to dodge. Hargen plunged his sword into the ground and started swinging it around. An aura appeared around him that shot fire in all directions. While he was shouting, the guys hid behind rocks and thought that although he was weaker than Taragon, but with the help of his skill, he was able to become a leader, and then he used a fire hurricane. Jun peeked out from behind the rocks for a while as everything flew apart and realized that if he slowed down even for a second, then he wouldn't even be able to collect his own bones, and if they didn't die here, then at least they might be knocked out, so he had to try. Jun was scratching his chin, considering a plan, when a green butterfly flew up to him, asking if Jun could hear him. June looked at the butterfly and asked if it was Doyle, and the butterfly said it was, because it was an insect, its transmitter, it transmits the owner's thoughts, but then he asks if there is any plan. June looks at him and asks if there's something he can do to contact Hyung, and Doyle says he can. Hargen screamed and called them to him, saying that if they didn't come, he would go to them. Jun jumped out from behind the rocks and looked at the boss, and then he began to beckon him with his finger and tell him to come to him. Jun stood with knives in his hands, and the boss shouted for him to die. At the same time, Jun activated the dragon's eye and saw that his sword had a weak spot. Therefore, when the boss attacked, Jun blocked the blow precisely in the weak spot. Because of that, his knife started to break that huge sword into pieces. Jun swung his sword aside and dodged. The sword just fell into the ground, blowing the wind everywhere. Then through the mask, John shouted to the guys to act right now. June stopped and asked Hyung and Doyle to wait. Hyung swung his sword and cut the monster. Doyle looked at it all and held up his hand. The monster began to burn with fire, and Jun, looking at all this, realized that with the help of their joint efforts, Hargen's power was gradually weakening. The monster stood and spoke angrily. He said that he would not forgive them and would avenge Taragon. He said that if they lost control for even a little while, it would be the end and they should pull themselves together. The monster took between two hands, and I used Firestorm. Jun swung his sword and slashed at the monsters. They started attacking it, and the monster screamed as they managed to get it moving. After which, he exhaled and said that he would avenge everyone, as well as their children. Jun held onto his burden of knowing that now was the right moment. He skipped under the monster's feet and landed a few punches. The monster crouched on its feet and tried to attack Jun, but it was too late. Jun reached out and grabbed the man's head. The monster gave a startled look and a system message said that Bathory's vampiric dagger skill level had increased to 5.4%. The absorption of life force energy has begun. The monster screamed in the flames to let it go. Jun stood there and looked on coolly. He called out to his comrades, and he said that he would kill him no matter what the cost. They stood and stared at the fire and the shadows. He said that he had to take revenge for all this, and the monster let go of his sword. The system message said that the Hargen boss has been destroyed, and each member of the group will receive additional points according to their contribution to the victory. They successfully absorbed the opponent's core skill with the Bathory vampire dagger. Jun has a new ability called Firestorm. Jun looked at the dried up monster's body, and due to the low level of proficiency in the Bathory Empyrean dagger, the ability he received would be changed. The Fiery Hurricane ability has been changed to Fiery Wrath. The rank was D+, a personalized form of Hargen's special ability. Jun could transform the flame into any shape he wanted. As the skill level increases, the flame temperature will gradually increase. Jun calculated all of this and realized that it was unlikely that he would be able to raise the skill to Fire Hurricane due to his lack of skill level. But nevertheless, it was already a great success and he could embody flames in various forms. He realized that he needed to try it out later. He clutched his head and his companions ran up to him. Hyun grabbed the bag by the shoulder and asked if it was okay. Jun was looking at his palm, and Doyle said that he needed to sit down and they didn't know how badly he was hurt in this battle. Jun said he was fine and not to be worried about him. He said that it was just a little difficult for him to move, it should pass with time. They stood and held his hands and urged him to rest. Jun said he was fine and wanted them to get away from him as soon as possible. He also said that he was fine and asked what about those people in the cages, since they were not fine. Doyle came to his senses, and they went to rescue them. In the cave, they could be heard thanking them, and a man once again thanked them for being able to avenge their dead comrades. He bowed and said that now they could rest in peace. Hyung and Doyle were standing there, smiling. They said it wasn't hard for them and they just did what they had to do. The man asked if he wasn't Hyung, but the person standing next to him was Foxdale. Hyung put his hand behind his head and said with a smile what he wanted to keep a secret. Doyle watched it all and knew that the man wanted to keep it a secret, but what he really wanted was attention. Hyung spread her hand to the side and said that Hargan's capture was not only due to him, because he was just helping. They looked at Jun, who was sitting idly by, and said that if it wasn't for him, it would be hard to imagine what would have happened. But now, people looked at all this in surprise and remembered how they saw Jun standing. Hyung noticed their disbelief, and he asked what it was. The man didn't quite say that when Doyle found them the first time, the guy told Doyle to drop them and follow him. He closed his eyes and said that maybe this statement was too bold of him, but he couldn't see the guy as a human being. Hyung said that it really was too cheeky and gave him a rude look. The man looked at it in fright and didn't understand anything. Hyung said that it was over and there was no need to focus on it. He pointed a finger at the man and said that whatever the original reason, he was still the one who saved them in the end, and he was also their comrade along with Doyle. He said that in the boss fight, he suffered the most and made the most impact. And in general, it is rather stupid for a man to draw his conclusions, as if he got caught by those lizards, he would barely survive and he should be afraid of that person. He asked again if he was going to continue spouting such nonsense towards Jun. The man looked down with shaking hands and Hyung asked if he dared to hit him. He asked what was wrong with him. All the people who were there started looking around awkwardly, and the man apologized. Hyung said he couldn't hear, and the man repeated it louder. Hyung looked in Jun's direction and said that the man should apologize to him, but to the one who saved him. The man approached Jun, who continued to sit back in silence, and bent down to apologize to him and say that he had behaved incorrectly. He hoped that the man would forgive him for those rude words. Inside the tower itself, human relations were based on the same principle. The man was dissatisfied with this and said to himself that they were all creatures. He knew that when they were caught, they didn't need him so much, and he risked his life whenever they needed something. He recalled all this, and now the situation became more complicated. He wondered why everyone was avoiding him. Another one person approached him and asked for forgiveness for not being able to support him, but he can also understand him because he knows their way of life. The man said he didn't know what he was hinting at, so he suggested just going ahead. He told me to wait a bit and listen to him. He asked the man if they didn't need tokens and artifacts. They looked in the direction of Doyle and Hyung, and they realized that those people had a whole treasure trove and artifacts along with tokens. He asked him if he wanted his share. The man asked what kind of nonsense he was talking about, and he said that it was all for the sake of survival. The man asked what it meant for survival, and he recalled that the man had said that to do this, they had to kill their savior. He said that no one should have been killed, and he gave a thumbs up. He said it was theft, of course, or else they'd lost everything, and he was well aware of the circumstances. They had already tried to just walk into Sector E and almost died, so they could steal as much as they could carry to become independent. The man asked what they should do if they were caught. He said they were going to be killed, and the guy spread his arms and said they were going to be killed anyway, so it didn't make any difference. The man said that he agreed with this and asked what about the plants. He said that they couldn't just recklessly attack them. The guy smiled and said that among his friends there is one who has a lot of tokens. He said he was a pro at it. The guy smiled at this news and told me to tell you more about it. There was a light on in the cave, and the guy started telling them that Kane was here too, and it was time to distribute the trophy. Hyun held out his hand and said that under their agreement, they were collecting the crown of Hargan for themselves. Jun agreed, and Hyung said that he thought he was a good guy from the beginning. Jun told him to get it over with, but he just laughed. Hyung looked to the side and told his partner to pick him up. Jun looked and wondered if we should have hit him one time. He closed his eyes and realized that even so, there was no reason for him not to hate him since he was just a little weird. He turned his head to the side and looked at the weapon. Hyung told Jun to take the blue scale sword and rare relics as they agreed. Jun mainly used short blades, so this sword wasn't suitable for him. His classification was as follows. A two-handed weapon of rank D+. The description was as follows. The scimitar that Hargan used. It carried the power of fire, and due to its high durability, it could destroy anything. Jun knew that he still didn't know where these artifacts would be useful to him right now, but they might be valuable items in the tower. Ownership of Hargan's lair. Jun will get the right to all rare items and resources that were inside the lair. List of lair items. 1 red orc helmet. 2 axe scream. 3 times the crystal X 3 times. Jun realized that there was something useful after all. Karshuna's dagger. He was armed with a one-handed D-class weapon. The description was as follows. A dagger that was used throughout the life of the unknown war. Initially, it was a simple weapon that wasn't difficult to find, but gradually, it absorbed the quality of its master and became much stronger. Warrior support. As your skill level increases with this dagger, your attack power and speed will increase. Jun could see that his knives were already blunted, and this dagger is just right for him to complete his training to the end. He looked up, and Doyle asked him what he didn't like. Jun said that there weren't any useful items, but it wouldn't be superfluous, so they shouldn't worry about him. Jun told him to look up and asked if he was tired of hiding there. Doyle looked up in surprise, and there was a blue portal. A voice came from there, and he said that there was a little bit of this, but playing hide and seek, you couldn't get caught by the driver. The voice said that Jun had been quick-witted along the way. A merchant got out and he held his head and said that he just wanted to surprise them. He came down to the ground, and Doyle and Hyung asked if Jun knew the merchant too. The merchant said it was loud and he would have called their relationship special. The merchant said that he also hadn't seen these guys in a while, and it seems to him that one meeting since they bought a return ticket from him was quite a long time ago. Hyung noticed this, and when I remember how much they paid him back then, it makes him feel bad. He understood that to get close to the mysterious merchant, one would need to be in the top one of the training rankings, but Jun was the same person who was personally chosen by the mysterious merchant. The merchant came up to them and said that next time he would pretend that he didn't know anything, because it wasn't interesting at all. Jun asked if he thought it was too easy since it seemed like they had already seen through him. Jun said that he would sell him the ownership of the lair and the blue scale sword for 150 tokens. The merchant idly assumed that Jun wanted to bargain with him if he wanted to take 150 grand. He decided to bargain, but Jun immediately offered 160 tokens. The merchant hesitantly said that he couldn't after Jun raised the price to 180. The merchant said that he should pay an equal price. The newest one raised the price to 200 tokens. The merchant smiled and asked if he really thought that at this price, a cake was really possible. Jun raised the price to 300 tokens and said that the faster he bought, the better, and if he was slow, the price would go up and up. He said that if he didn't agree, then he would be left with nothing and the lair would disappear. And all the crystals that are here will also disappear. The merchant said they could easily be found anywhere, but he was surprised when Jun noticed that the merchant said that finding a magic crystal was easy, but the sample of which is more than 70 units is simple, and he did not know this, and then he will have to get rid of all this. He didn't understand why the reward for the Hargan's Lair quest was so small, and why ownership of the lair was being transferred as a reward. The tower is a place where rewards are given out according to the achievements received, and Hargan's Lair is an area where you could mine high-grade magic crystals. These crystals were the primary means by which magical power could be stored and transmitted. It served the same function as the conductors on Earth. The higher the sample, the higher its power transmission efficiency was, which was why they were usually very expensive, especially those with a sample of more than 70 units. That was why the mysterious merchant had his eye on Hargan's Lair. The merchant said that 300 tokens for a magic crystal was too expensive after Jun raised his price to 400 tokens. He understood that there was no doubt that there were such expensive magic crystals, and the higher the grade, the harder it was to get such a crystal, but since he had the opportunity, why didn't he knock some extra tokens out of the merchant? The merchant held up his hands and agreed to the offer. He asked to stop raising his price as he agreed to the amount he offered, given that he would no longer raise it. He said that they would go bankrupt at this rate, and with his head down, Jun said that he was selling it for 405 tokens, and 5 grand was for wasting his time. The merchant was upset and said it was the first time he had ever seen a man who was even more violent than he was. The system message said that he had sold the blue scale skill and the ownership of Hargan's Lair. 405 tokens were received. The merchant was upset and realized that he had been tricked by an ordinary gambler. Jun looked at the stats and his number of tokens was 698. The comrades stood there and did not understand what was going on. Jun turned his head and told the frustrated merchant to wait there. The merchant said it was a scam and he had nothing else left. He turned around and asked him what he wanted to take away from him. Jun said that if you listened to him, you would think that Jun was a bandit of some sort. Jun wanted to buy something. The merchant was delighted and asked him what he wanted. Jun pointed to his mask and said that he wanted one of his own because it was broken. The merchant shook his head. He held out his hand to the side and said that he had plenty of them and would sell them for 1111 strength. Jun said it was in addition to what he had already bought. Hyung looked away with a smile and didn't know where this was even seen. Jun said that he was canceling the deal because he didn't care. The merchant got angry and he snapped his fingers. He said that he had done a great job during the course so he could pick it up as a special offer. He said that if he continued to make such a mess, he would not come again. The system message said that he had received a white ghost mask. The classification was a C+ helmet. The description was as follows: a mask associated with several spirits. It gave a strange look and hid the face. This mask wasn't too difficult to remove or drop, and also one reduced the damage received. The merchant went to the portal and Jun put on a new mask. It felt like it was stuck to his face, but he liked it because it wasn't easy to remove, and it also protected him from various injuries. The system message said that a white ghost mask was received. Jun thanked the merchant and he said that he knew what real gratitude is and went to the portal. He looked in Jun's direction and said that he was foolishly brave to sell magic crystals. He asked if it was because he knew about the situation. Jun asked what he was talking about, and the merchant said that he just misunderstood him. He went into the portal and thought deeply about the magic stones with high-end breakdown, and he realized that they were the basis of high-quality artifacts. They formed a certain layer in the market, which is why they had a certain price. He realized that the mysterious merchant had so absurdly agreed to buy them even though the price was high, which meant that the demand for them had suddenly increased. He realized that it was unlikely that this was due to the number of new players. There could only be one reason. It was because, for some reason, it was necessary to produce more high-quality artifacts. It was a war. He realized that then things would clear up and inside the tower, the rivalry between clans and players would get tougher. Hyung asked what they were going to do next, and Jun asked what he was talking about. Hyung said what about what they would do next according to the plan of action. He said that Jun had collected enough tokens and now it was possible to move to Sector F. Jun was originally ranked 150th and now it has risen to 52. He looked at the top leaders and realized that, however, the difference with the first place was still great. He still had a few things to do, and the boss who resided in Sector E was the most outstanding hidden part of training. He realized that it was time to go after him and he refused Hyung, saying that he wasn't going to move to the new sector yet. He said that he needed to check out the first place. Hyung was surprised by this, and Doyle said that he also wanted to know something. He asked Jun if he wanted to stay on the team with them. Doyle offered to be on the team together until they completed their training, and after they did, he also offered to be together. He clenched his hands into fists and said with a smile that the truth was that he and Hyung had already talked it over a long time ago and they would have made a good team, and even better than they expected. Jun shook his head and the other man said that if they formed a team of 3, they would achieve a lot of success. Jun said it wouldn't work and he said he had things to do. Doyle said that since he was talking like that, he could finish everything and join them later. Jun said that he wasn't interested in finding a team from the beginning and didn't really like being associated with anyone or anything. Doyle was upset and his companion put her hands on his shoulder with a smile. Hyung said that there was nothing to be done about it, each person had their own nature because they couldn't force him to go against his will. Hyung suggested we leave together. He turned his head and said that they would go now and they would be waiting outside. They came to the surface and walked through the swamp of humanoid lizards. Jun realized that it would take him a long time to leave this place. He went ahead and dealt with the lizards, there were a lot of them on the way back, so he decided to leave with Hyung and Doyle until they got through all this swamp. The players standing at the back only followed the other comrades who were defending the entire place. Jun knew that if they screwed up here, they would be in a difficult situation together with a group of other people. Jun looked to the side and asked Hyung what would happen to all these people now. He looked at them and said that it was impossible to say exactly what would happen to them now, but he was sure that they should have taken them out of the swamp area for safety. Jun said they couldn't be bothered forever and something had to be done. Hyung said that he still had a sense of humanity and couldn't just leave. Junya thought about this feeling and didn't understand how it was supposed to be in training. Jun had always felt this way, and despite their poise, they were too kind. The guy excused himself and asked if Doyle might have accidentally shared any food with them. People by nature were sometimes too kind, and that could be toxic to them. Doyle held out a bag of food and apologized for not being able to give them more and asked them to take at least this. The man thanked him and accepted the food. Jun thought this place was filled with people who were just waiting for a chance to stab her in the back. He was looking at all this and even if he said it, it was obvious that no one would listen to him, and in any case, he didn't want to worry too much about it because he was about to leave this place and these people. After that, the man approached Mr. Iden with a bag and said that he brought food once you asked for. He looked at all this with a smile and realized that he had already gathered quite a lot of people and this was just survival. He said that they could steal these people, but that was only stage 1. If they also wanted to steal tokens or artifacts, it would attract quite a lot of attention and it was all nonsense. The man, idly smiling, wondered if it was enough to just put it all away. He understood that their enemies were ranked 3rd and 11th, and that guy who defeated the Lizard King was quite strong. He licked his lips and knew that if he could get all these guys to explain why he was here, then first place would be real enough. He looked at Jun and understood that there was something creepy about this guy, and when he was watching him, he didn't even know if he was doing it on purpose or not. But when their gazes collided, he felt a chilling and cold-blooded gaze from that white mask. He thought that Jun was like demons who saw right through him and it gave the guy goosebumps. One of the people came up to Hyung and Doyle and said that some people there suddenly felt unwell. They looked at them and people asked if it was possible to go slower as it was very hard for them and many people wanted to take a break. They shouted that they couldn't walk and had nothing left. They said that even if they got out of here, they would still go to feed the monsters. They said it would be better to stay here. Hyun closed her eyes and clutched her head. He said maybe I should have given them some tokens and left them here. The guy realized that now was the right time and one of the people said with a smile that they had all been imprisoned all this time and he thought they were just mentally exhausted. He knew that these people who had saved them were busy, but he asked if they remembered to rest for a while wherever they were nearby. The guy had been standing off to the side the whole time, smiling. He knew that the group of scavengers hiding in the shadows, consisting of several dozen people, was the right moment when they would reach the specified place and the trap would close. That's when they can get their hands on them. The man looked at all this and knew that everything would be easy. He looked to the side and saw Jun standing in front of him, looking at him questioningly, after which a shout rang out and everyone looked to the side. Jun went ahead and stabbed the man to death. A lot of people were standing and watching. Jun turned his head and he knew that his target was the players who were together with that dead guy. He took one of the guys by the head and swung his sword. They began to worry and wonder how Jun had even found out about all this. Jun delivered a cutting blow to one of them, and he realized that by using his heightened senses, he was able to capture the environment that was changing every minute in this place. He remembered the times when the guy was thinking about Yeon-Woo's look and he was giving out some instructions to the other players. He avoided everyone's eyes, even when Velasquez was there. It was obvious enough that he was hiding something, so he took advantage of his heightened senses and prepared for any eventuality. He soon realized that there was a group of people lying in ambush somewhere waiting for them. He understood that these people could only be scavengers. He raced after the other guy and realized that he would hit one before they started moving. Hyung uncomprehendingly stood in front of Jun with his arms spread apart and asked him what he was doing. Jun said he was a fool and if he didn't think straight, he should step aside. Jun looked to the side and said that until the situation was resolved, it was best for him to sit quietly and watch everything. Hyung looked around and they were surrounded by people who were smiling and had their weapons ready. Hyung and Doyle pressed their backs together, ready to defend themselves. One of the guys asked what it all meant and the other said they were all caught. He punched Tom in the face, and he said they didn't need that kind of garbage. Hyung watched all of this while holding his sword and realized that they had gotten rid of an ordinary player. He didn't understand what kind of fools they were. Jun rushed forward and realized that it was people who created the dungeon, and usually scavengers are not the only ones who were engaged in looting. Among them, there were also those who made a pact with monsters, becoming a decoy pretending to be injured, and instead of luring players into a trap pretending to be weak players, and monsters got their loot as the player himself, and scavengers took the artifact and tokened themselves. Jun knew that most of the players imprisoned in that dungeon were probably killed. After that, we see a blue sky, and someone laughed and did not suspect that it was a bloody blade and a fox's tail. He supposed it would be cool if they could catch them. The guy took the crystal that glowed with a blue light and said that apart from those crazy siblings, Pant and Edaru, they were actually the best team. The very fact that they had crushed them would be astounding, and they must have had a lot of things. The boy looked at this crystal and said that he would take the Dragon Slayer sword that Bloodblade was carrying with him. That guy was joking. He said that he one will take this sword wheelbarrow. Another guy said that whoever one takes it, he will be his master. His name was Noin. Subai Sidla told them all to shut up, because they had to calculate everything and so they had to stop leaking, and the best thing was to think about what they would do with the reward they were giving for the Lizard King. He looked at the crystals and said that he didn't see them and there was something fishy about it. He asked his friend to contact Aiden. He held the crystal in his hands and nothing came out. They didn't understand where they had gone and told Noin to check on Leonid's location. A voice called out from the crystal, but a bloody hand was lying next to it. Subai didn't understand what was going on and couldn't contact his comrades. He understood that they were just arguing over their dragon sword, but for some reason, they stopped responding. He thought about it and realized that in this case, it was an attack. He stood up and began to turn his head. He understood that he was in the 15th place in the top players, and judging by his abilities, he was in the top 10 at all. He shouted out where his comrades were and walked forward. He didn't understand why he hadn't been able to notice the signs of an attack before all of his comrades had died. He looked to the side and noticed how his comrade was lying on the ground and was completely covered in blood. I quietly told him to run and said demon. Jun appeared from behind him, and he was very scared that he could feel her chilling gaze from behind. After that, we flashed to the people who surrounded Doyle and Hyung. Hyung had read that they considered themselves vigilantes who kept the training under their control. After that, there was a blow to one from the opponents and it was Jun. He started throwing punches at the other guys, and they were yelling at them to stop him. Doyle and Hyung helped him, and the men surrendered, begging for mercy. The system message wrote that the information about the scavenger hostess collapsed. When they first showed their true colors, people were on their knees and said that they not only did what they were asked to do, but they couldn't do anything about it. They said that they had no choice but to take their side in order to survive. Hyung asked how they were different from Hargan then. People didn't understand what he was talking about, and Hyung approached the man and once again asked how they were different from the Hargan who ate their comrades. He said that they were complete idiots. Hyun stabbed the man with a sword and said that Hargana cried when she saw his wife and children killed, and they trafficked people and there was nothing. He said that they still stayed with the deceived people and killed. People looked at the whole picture and Hyun realized that he was born the son of one of the great tower players. By rejecting his father's influence, he had achieved everything on his own. He looked at the dead person and understood that such a person just needed to get a confession. Jun walked over to his companions who were sitting on a rock, and Hyung said that they all thought they were still rescuing people who were caught by the Lizard King, but it turned out that everyone who did the dirty work and was a prisoner was dying. There were only those who ran all these cases left, and this should have been a big shock. Doyle was covering her face with her hand, and June said that he had seen this happen many times in Africa, but it was the first time they had encountered it. Jun knew that now they must have doubted people and felt anger towards him for doing such bad things. He understood that these were incredibly complex feelings. He said that there was no cure for this and all that was left was to wait and get your thoughts and mental state in order yourself. Hyung asked how Jun was feeling, but he said he was used to it by now. He didn't understand what kind of life he had, because he can't even imagine. He asked all the people were like that in his world. Jun said that if everyone became like him, the world would go completely mad. Hyun covered his face with his hands and he asked if he could be honest. He said all those damn pretenders pretending to be victims were so scared, but the truth was he was also a little scared when he thought of himself. Jun listened to him in silence, and Hyung stood up and asked him how he could stay cool even in such a situation. He asked him if he suspected these people from the beginning or if he just never trusted anyone. Hyung looked ahead and realized that it should have been about him and his friendy, and not all this time they were players who were inside this tower, which is why it was better not to trust anyone, but they created a team based only on trust. It would be difficult to end their relationship in a good way, and Hyung and Doyle had a particularly strong sense of trust in each other, and it was a big blow to both of them to realize that the relationship was only for their own benefit. Jun looked ahead and realized that they didn't think of each other as strangers, and the smiling Hyung and the good-natured Doyle had a lot of human feelings and emotions, but they had their own. He has his own point of view. Jun suggested that they break up here, and he knew they weren't the same, so they'd better break up right now. Doyle jumped up and Hyung held out his hand. Doyle asked him what had come over him and asked him to tell him everything. Doyle said that Kane would do them a lot of good and they couldn't just go their separate ways. Hyung asked him to sit down again and looked at him with displeasure. He said it was the best option. Doyle looked at him blankly. They looked at each other and looked at the sword that was sticking out of the ground. They didn't think it was a keychain and Hyung said it was an Aranda badge. He said it was all very strange and he didn't understand why the people from Aranda no Blue Flower Island, who were trying to keep things in order for no particular benefit, were suddenly making such a mess. Beyond Aranda was Blue Flower Island. Such large clans inside the tower could be counted on one's fingers. Of course, there were a lot of candidates to join, so they only selected the ones they liked the most. Blue Flower Island created Aranda to control the world, but many clans and players still doubted his true intentions. They whispered and spread rumors, but in the absence of any evidence, there was nothing to do but simply drop the case, or it was all just a cover for effective control of the scavengers. Doyle said that, come to think of it, Blue Flower Island had suddenly decided to create Aranda, which was strange since Ardia had already completely destroyed the scavengers inside. Hyung made a face and assumed that they needed a more reliable system, which was why he didn't want to drag Jun into all this, but he felt like he really had things to do that he absolutely had to finish. Doyle knew this very well, and he apologized to him and told him that in any case, he had to see that Fool build and solve his problem. Hyung told him to go ahead to the place where Bigrid was. Bigrid is another one hidden item. It was in order to get it that Hyung and Doyle needed Hargan's crown. It was a sword that could help them turn the situation in their favor and defeat Pant and Edora, who had the upper hand in points. This sword that they wanted to end up with in training. Doyle smiled and asked what he was saying. He said that he also wanted to see the faces of these fools, as he was curious to death. After that, we see a blue sky, and someone said that no matter how much he pretended to be smart, he always ended up acting like a fool, after which someone walked on the grass and stopped in place. It was June, and he looked around and said they were stupid. He had a rough idea of where the two of them were going and what they were thinking after such an unexpected breakup. He looked into the distance and realized that he still had to go east to finish all the business. He knew that if he didn't do it now, he would never do it again, and he would never have a better chance. If he had asked her to come with me on the eve of their breakup, would they have refused just as dryly or not? Jun wondered. He closed his eyes and walked forward, after which, we are transported to a scene where two men were standing near a set of weapons. One asked if Group 2 was destroyed. He believed that this guy was the culprit. He was angry and said that they could have caught him, but they couldn't pass up this chance, and that's not even counting the fact that they lost their Hargan. He said they were idiots and now he would have to deal with it himself. The man asked for forgiveness, said that he had nothing to say about this, and the other man asked to cook one group. The guy raised his head and asked did the man mean those people. The squad that was called the Valor Squad in Aranda are special players who were raised on Blue Flower Island. The man didn't know if he wanted to use the three of them. He said that the three of them were superior to Group 2 and were able to deal with Bloodblade, Foxtail, and that masked guy. He said that they had to take into account all the details and he felt that he would have to go with them too. The guy put his hand to his chin and began to think about everything. With all the losses they had suffered, there might be some difficulties with this, and Bloodblade and Foxtail didn't know what to expect from them. And that masked guy instead didn't exactly know if he could have been someone secretly sent by or if he was just too suspicious. He understood that it was only necessary to act as secretly as possible and it was necessary to destroy them and not leave any evidence. After Ardia's disappearance, the world that was once established inside the tower was gradually weakening, and this was not surprising. So at any moment everything could just collapse. But first of all, they needed to stock up on a powerful force so that no one knew about it. Then they looked up and realized it was an invasion. Everything started to fall apart and the guy asked what it was. Another guy ran inside and said that they had come. It was a Bloodblade and a Foxtail. The guy looked out of hiding and rocks were flying in his direction. He looked ahead and saw Hyung and Doyle enter through the opening. The fog shattered and Hyun fiercely clenched his hand into a fist and started shouting. He began to emit a bright energy and repels other people. One of them took his sword with a smile and said that he was still bored in this training and took out a weapon to have fun against the son of the Iron Lion. Hyung also swung his sword, and they crossed swords. After that, we are transported to another place and see a wide wasteland where the orcs lived and set up their village. The orcs also looked away and Jun cut off one of their heads. The other orc hesitated and was about to attack him with his sword, but Jun pinned him to the wall and was about to kill him, but orc started begging for mercy and Jun said that he would only ask him about one. He asked if he had seen the hunter's camp and if they might have been hiding in the mountains. The frightened monster said that he had never seen it himself, and the tribesmen said that when they went to investigate, they saw a strange house. Jun realized that this was what he was looking for, and the monster reported to him that it was very high and they couldn't get there by themselves. Jun realized that this must have been the location of an informant who knew where to find the hidden boss snake Akasha. This boss appeared at a certain time in a certain place under certain conditions, and Jun couldn't find it without the help of this person. Jun asked where it was all located. Jun remembers his brother, who was attacked by a huge snake. He thinks that Akashi's snake periodically comes out to breathe air, and at the same time to fill an empty stomach. His brother did not know this and decided to go to this boss, and at the moment of approaching troubles, he met this man, a man who also helped his brother and Arsha in a critical situation. Jun remembers that this was Yeon-Woo's first teacher, Galliard. Jun went to a small house that was near the edge of the cliff. Looking at it, he asked what it was here. Jun stepped closer and knocked on the door, then excused himself. Suddenly, someone came up behind him and asked who he was. Jun turned around and saw an elf holding a dead animal on his shoulder. He had a displeased look, and behind him was a bow and arrow. Jun thought that Galliard was not a human. He was one of the few elves, and even among them he was considered a dark elf with innate elf abilities. Galliard discontentedly approached Jun. Jun introduced himself saying that his name is Jun. Galliard frowned and replied that from the fact that his name is Jun, why is he mistaken near someone else's house? Jun, looking ahead, said that he had learned about Galliard from a friend of his. There was one thing he would like to buy. He asked that his name was Galliard after all. Galliard looked at Jun with a puzzled expression, and then Jun said that he wanted to find Undine's tear. Galliard was holding a dead animal on his back, and then he asked what Jun had learned about it from, and Jun said that he had learned from Braham that Braham was Galliard's ancient friend and Yeon-Woo's second teacher. Galliard gritted his teeth and slapped his hand across his face, and then he said that he was an idiot. He had asked him to be quiet, and he started again. And Jun thought that even though he didn't know him by sight, it was unlikely that they would ever see each other again, and what difference did it make? Galliard opened the door, then said there was nothing he could do about it. Galliard went inside with Jun, and there were many different trophies inside the house. Galliard laid the dead body of the animal on the table, and then looking at Jun said that he was saying that he needed Undine's tear. Jun replied that he did. He thought of her, that glittering blue crystal, and then wondered if it was an artifact that contained a large amount of Akashic energy, which might be good food for her. Galliard stared at Jun and then said that he knew what the conditions were, and Jun said that he did. And then he thought that the problem was that only Galliard knew how to make an Undine tear properly. In front of Jun, a system message appeared. Galliard said that this is great, they won't